So in order to properly celebrate Halloween, we're here at Michael Myers' house to discuss the surprisingly coherent timeline of the Halloween films, as well as how continuity works within the series. Also, for such an iconic design, we're going to discuss just how much Michael Myers' mask changes from film to film.
So we start off the first film on Halloween night, 1963, and the movie is nice enough to tell us that, making my job a hell of a lot easier. A young Michael Myers dresses in a clown costume and kills his sister. We know that he's 6 years old here, as the murder is discussed later in the film, and then we jump ahead 15 years to right before Halloween in 1978, the year the film was released. Michael's psychiatrist, Sam Loomis, is on hand as a now 21-year-old Michael escapes the clinic in which he is being held. Somewhere along the way, he robs a hardware store and takes a mold of William Shatner's face and then begins stalking a high school girl who has a crystal ball into John Carpenter's future. Fun fact, Michael is one of the few slasher icons that can be frequently seen driving a car. He quickly kills off 3 of her friends in a relatively short time, one of whom he totally strangles, and then he goes after Laurie herself, but luckily Loomis is right there. Oh wait, he's busy telling some little kids to get their ass away from that house. Laurie faces off against Michael, stabbing him with a needle, poking his eye out with a hanger, and finally stabbing him with his own knife. Of course, he's not dead, and Loomis finally shows up to put 6 shots into him, although his body quickly vanishes. 3 years later, a sequel arrived, although it's actually a direct continuation of the events of the previous film and takes place on the same night, setting it once again on October 31st, 1978. Laurie gets taken to a nearby hospital, which is remarkably empty at all times, which Michael quickly lays siege to, killing off most of the staff. He's wearing the same mask from the original, although a different actor gives it a different look and shape. There's apparently a surplus of these masks around because Ben Tramer, a character who's only spoken about in the first one, finds a blonde version of it and is spotted by Loomis. Loomis thinks it's Michael because he's totally competent, and shouts at him. For some reason, this causes Ben to get hit by a car and killed in a fire. Anyway, Loomis does figure out that Laurie is Michael's sister who was given up for adoption while Michael was in a psych ward and heads to the hospital to save her, and he does, sort of, by getting stabbed and dropping his gun so that Laurie can pick up his gun and shoot Michael in both of his eyes because she's not only one hell of a shot, but she really has it out for Michael's eyes. Loomis turns on the ether and oxygen while Laurie sneaks past blind Michael and Loomis ignites the gas, blowing himself up while Michael stumbles out and apparently dies. So a mere 1 year later, when it's time for a new Halloween movie, they were faced with what to do now that Michael was dead, and the answer was to go in a totally different direction. Their idea was to make the Halloween series into an anthology with a new storyline every year, so Part 3 figured a new villain. Stonehenge.
Yep.
You gotta love Part 3 though, with the crazy commercials, the killer Halloween mask, and of course the fabulous Tom Atkins. Just to be clear on continuity, this film is absolutely set in its own universe, separate from the previous 2, as there is a commercial for the original film playing on television. It does feature a quick cameo from Jamie Lee Curtis though, as the voice on the phone. Turns out people really liked Michael Myers, so the third film was a box office failure, prompting the character's return, although it took 6 years to release Halloween 4. This one takes place 10 years after the events of the previous film, allowing it to happen in real time in 1988. We found out that both Michael and Loomis are both still alive, with the good doctor suffering from burns on his face and Michael is in a coma-like state and back in captivity. While being moved, one of the doctors reveals that at some point, Laurie had a daughter, which snaps Michael out of it and sends him on a new rampage. Laurie has seemingly died as the kids at school refer to little Jamie as an orphan. Michael steals a new mask from a convenience store and a new one is, well, pretty blank. It's got those Kardashian-style eyebrows and slick-back hair, though. Michael kills a few people, including an entire police station, and this girl with a t-shirt that says, "Cops do it by the book." Her dad is the sheriff.
Let that sink in.
Jamie, her adoptive sister, and the male love interest become trapped in the house somehow, even though he has a shotgun and there are plenty of windows because, as he states, it's metal. Anyway, he gets killed, but Jamie and Rachel escape, leading them to run Michael over with a car just in time for the posse to arrive and shoot him into a convenient nearby mine shaft, which are always just kind of laying around, aren't they? We get a little cliffhanger insinuating that Jamie is now evil as Michael, and then we end. A mere 1 year later, Halloween 5 was released, continuing the story, and they were nice enough to have 1 year pass in the context of the film, keeping us in real time, with the film being set in 1989. We find out that Michael survived the mine shaft hoo-ha and was rescued by a kindly old man who I guess allows him to sleep on his couch for a year. We also find out that Jamie stabbed her foster mother with scissors, although she survived, but the trauma made Jamie mute. The day before Halloween, Michael awakes and suddenly has a new tattoo on his wrist, and even though it's supposed to be the same mask, it now looks like elongated and more severe with even bushier hair and eyebrows. He pretty much immediately kills Rachel and continues to bump off a bunch of Randys, while at the same time, Jamie's voice starts coming back and a mysterious stranger dressed in black arrives in town. We get one really solid sequence with Jamie in a laundry suit in which we really realize that, hey, this is a grown man trying to attack and kill a 9-year-old girl. They have a touching moment where Jamie calls Michael uncle, prompting him to take his mask off, but he quickly reverts back to his psychotic ways. Loomis finally shows up to trap Michael in chains and shoots him with a tranquilizer gun, and then apparently suffers from a stroke, collapsing on Michael. All is not safe, though, as the Man in Black shows up and breaks Michael out of prison, leaving us with a cliffhanger for another installment. But legal battles delayed Part 6 for a full 6 years, delaying the curse of Michael Myers until 1995. The film is nice enough to also jump 6 years, setting it in 95 as well, and they let us know this in the opening narration. We learned that both Michael and Jamie disappeared 6 years ago. We see an apparently 15-year-old Jamie, who is now pregnant, give birth to a baby, which is quickly marked with the same tattoo that we saw Michael have. Jamie escapes with the baby, but he quickly catches her and kills her, although the baby is now missing. Michael has a new mask here, and it looks a lot like the one from the first film. We also get introduced to the character of Tommy Doyle, the little boy from the first movie, who is now 25 and obsessed with killing Michael Myers, and hey, it's Paul Rudd, or Paul Stephen Rudd, as the opening credits tell us. Tommy finds the baby, and Loomis turns out to still be alive, only retired. The Strode family have also now moved into the old Myers house, because you always move into the house of the guy who tried to kill a family member, although the house is different now. We get some sort of explanation that Michael is part of an ancient druid curse that makes him evil and appears when the stars align, and yeah, that. Anyway, Loomis's friend is the Man in Black, and he's controlling Michael. That goes horribly wrong when Michael pretty much randomly starts killing all the druids and then comes back after our heroes, and they manage to stay alive, and Paul Rudd stabs Michael with reagent and then beats the living tar out of him, I guess killing him. Finally, we're left with the most confusing cliffhanger of all as we see Michael's mask on the ground while Loomis screams in the distance, and we get a sad note of the passing of Donald Pleasance. There's also the infamous producer's cut in which we apparently learn that the baby is actually Michael and Jamie's. Ew. But also, Tommy stops Michael with magic, and the ending is even more confusing, but it's not officially in continuity, so we're not counting it. Halloween H2O followed, released in 1998 to celebrate the 20th anniversary of the first film, and the opening title screen shows us that once again, the year of release is the year the film is set in. Go back. Immediately, we were introduced to Marion, who we haven't seen since the second film, and she's promptly killed off, and Michael kills Joseph Gordon-Levitt to boot. The next day, police fill in the blanks for us, letting us know that Sam Loomis has sadly passed away, and that also the last 4 movies didn't exist. We have a continuity reboot here as the movie follows only the first 2. We learn that Laurie Strode faked her death but is still alive, so Jamie Lee Curtis is back. She did not have Jamie, but she does have a teenage son, played by Josh Hartnett. Once you add in Michelle Williams and LL Cool J, I guess I'd say that you had the most star-studded Halloween yet, but come on. Paul Rudd. It turns out that Michael is celebrating his nephew's 17th birthday the same way he celebrated Laurie's, by trying to kill him. He kills off a few friends, leading to this scene with 2 oddities. First of all, we get a nice close-up of Michael's eye, which looks suspiciously not shot out like it was at the ending of Part 2, and we also get this CGI mask. You see, they used 2 different masks throughout the film, although you can really only see one in long shots since they did reshoots, and this one scene they were apparently unable to redo, so they altered Michael's mask with this totally convincing digital one. The mask they used throughout the majority of the film is, it's alright. You can kind of see the unused mask fairly clearly in this scene here, and it's really not much better. After an extensive stalk and chase, Laurie wins out by stabbing Michael in the chest with his own knife, and then the police arrive. As Michael's being taken away, Laurie steals his body, lets him wake up, runs him over, and then chops off his head, forever ending the Halloween saga. Just kidding. Halloween Resurrection was released 4 years later in 2002. It turns out that Michael switched outfits with one of the police officers and crushed his larynx, so the whole ending of the last movie was Laurie's extended murder of an innocent man. This one opens 3 years later, and the prologue takes place on Halloween 2001. Michael kills Laurie and hands the knife to a crazy guy who claims that Michael killed 4 students in the last film, floating the idea that Michael actually killed John and Molly after the events of the last film, which may be why Michael doesn't bother to track and stalk John in this one. So, a group of students and Busta freaking Rhymes shoot a reality show in the Myers house. Michael has a new mask, and this one is pretty damn close to the original. Anyway, kills people, stalks, blah blah blah. Should be noted that this is the only film in which Michael doesn't really have a reason to kill anyone. He's not chasing a family member here, he's just killing the people that are hanging out in his old house. So, skip to the end. Busta Rhymes karate kicks and electrocutes Michael Myers. The end. Cliffhanger. Okay, so now we're on to 2007's Rob Zombie's directed remake of the original.
Do I have to? I mean, I already did 6 and 7. 6 and 7. and I watched all of the Leprechaun movies. Okay.
We'll make this quick. We're not told the year, but it looks like 1970s, maybe. Michael kills his family. 17 years later, he kills a bunch more people. The opening may be 1978, so the movie's set in 1995, possibly. Here's Michael. Here's his mask. It's fairly cool. Here's Laurie. Here's Loomis. Laurie shoots Michael. The end. Second movie. It's 1 year later. Everyone is an asshole to each other at all possible times. Here's Hobo Michael's mask. He finally kills Danielle Harris in this one, although she's not playing Jamie. Michael gets shot by Chucky and then stabbed by Laurie, who then puts on Michael's mask and goes crazy. The end. So there you have it. 10 movies, 4 separate continuities. You've got 1, 2, 4, 5, and 6. 1, 2, H2O and Resurrection. Part 3 by itself, and the 2 Rob Zombie movies.
It'll be interesting to see how much of the continuity they use in the next one, if they use anything at all, because the only thing we know so far is that John Carpenter himself is back on board. So we'll see you next time. Please comment and share the video if you like it, subscribe if you want to see more, and most of all, have a happy Halloween. Hey, I'm here at Laurie Strode's house for this introduction to this week's episode of Horror Timelines, which is actually a little bit different because we're going to be doing updates. That's right. It's been 3 years since I've done this channel, and quite a few series that I've covered have now had new entries, and I figured it's time to touch back up with those and see if the continuity is kind of still holds up with the new entries. So the first one we're going to do, we're going to go all the way back to episode 2. It feels like forever ago. Our first update goes all the way back to episode 2 with an update to the Texas Chainsaw franchise with 2017's Leatherface. When we last left off this series, this is what we decided. The first and second film were one continuity. The first and third were a separate continuity. The first and fourth were yet another separate continuity. The remake and the second part of the remake were its own continuity. And then finally, the first and Texas Chainsaw 3D were its own continuity. That's a lot of continuities. Well, this one starts out on a Sawyer farm, and we meet younger Drayton and Jedediah, so it seems that we're linked to Texas Chainsaw 3D, or at least the earlier films, since they're not the Hewitts from the remakes. I guess that this is young Nubbins and younger Grandpa, and they let us know that it's 1955, so a little less than 20 years earlier than the original film. Mini fact, this character is supposed to be the father of Sally and Franklin, although it's not stated in the film itself. Deacon Frost shows up, and it's supposed to be the father of Bert from 3D, and he takes Jed away from the family. We bounce to 10 years later, so it's 1965 now, and there's a couple of kids here, and this one sure looks like what we think Leatherface would look like as a teenager. And they say that they changed his name and he'll be 18 soon, so he was most likely born around 1947, placing him at about 26 during the events of the original film. They escape, taking Handsome Jackson here and Nurse Elizabeth, and the police give chase and eventually kill Old Bud, eliminating him as a suspect for being Leatherface. When Jackson gets shot in the face, it looks like he's our guy, and Hartman is the villain. And they try to fix Jed Jackson's face, and of course the Sawyers are an even bigger villains, and the Saw finally gets some action. He kills Elizabeth and starts stitching his first skin mask, so there's clearly a prequel to the first film, and fits well with its continuity characters, but its efforts to link in 3D don't work. Sheriff Hartman is supposed to be the father of Bert Hartman from that film, and the writer claims that the chronology is Leatherface, then the original, and then 3D, but with the Bert character being a grown man of at least 30-something in the intro to 3D, that makes him like about in his 70s in the later film, which makes no sense. But then again, that film's timeline doesn't work in the first place, so it makes more sense as Leatherface, the original, and then Texas Chainsaw 2. Or 3. Or 4, or really any of them, except for Texas Chainsaw 3D.
So all said and done, I guess that works okay. The movie's not that great. It's not terrible. It's just not that great. For the next update, we're going to go back to episode 5 and actually check in on one of my favorite little guys and see how he's doing.
So, way back when I created my Leprechaun video, one of the things I suggested was that every movie featured a different Leprechaun and it wasn't the same character from film to film.
That was confirmed in 2018's Leprechaun Returns, which was a direct continuity of the first film and tells of young Lila going to fix up an old house. And Ozzy's back looking quite a bit older, and it's revealed that Lila is the daughter of Tori and that she died a year ago because for some reason Jennifer Aniston declined to appear in this one. And I imagine that was a tough choice. Lila's in college, so we're at the very least 18 years past the original, and we go back to the old house, and we meet our sorority victims. Ozzy gets slime splashed, and our old buddy Lubden pops out of his belly. Ozzy says he killed him 25 years ago, so if we go with the original taking place in 93, we're in real-time 2018. The Lep is no longer played by Warwick Davis because he declined to reappear in this one, and I imagine that was a tough choice. He's talking in rhyme again, and his shoeshine obsession is back, and
it could be a crackhead who got a hold of the wrong stuff. It's a leprechaun!
Sick reference movie. People start dying, the Lep is impervious to physical harm, and bald again, while Ozzy's ghost helps Lila. They use iron against him, which works pretty well, and they pump him full of liquefied clover to blow him up. There's a new wrinkle that says if any part of a leprechaun exists, then the little guy still lives. So we get multiple mini-leps, and he reforms, so they electrocute him and he burns, but the next day he's fine and headed to Bismarck. So that makes sense, and it was actually pretty enjoyable. I'm going to stand there. But yeah, I got a kick out of that. That was a lot of fun. But for our next update, we're actually going to go to the very next episode, which was episode 6. We're going to check in on the Phantasm boys and see if that makes sense. Phantasm and makes sense. That's a phrase that doesn't really go well together.
The tall man made his final appearance in 2016's Phantasm Ravager, and we last left our guys back in 1988, but Reggie's back in the desert, and he's not directed by Don Coscarelli for the first time. He's back on Earth after quite a while, but it's not clear how long. He immediately and rather coincidentally gets his CUDA back, and the balls are back. But we take a turn as Reg is also in a hospital with dementia, with Mike visiting him. The alternate bits with him in the car are the story that he's telling Mike, and he looks younger, so it's likely that those segments are set further back in the past. And this girl is reading Living Color by Kate Coscarelli, which came out in 1987, so we're at least past that. I'm thinking that we're probably a short time after part 4 here, and it's still 1988 or possibly early 89, with Reg wandering the desert after making his way back through the portal. Jebediah Morningside reappears in the delusion, Daniel Roebuck pops in for a second, but Mike doesn't seem to know what Reg is talking about, but he brings up the notion of parallel universes. Reg enters another gateway and meets the tall man, and the first film's Lady in Lavender returns as well. We then take a hard turn as Reg ends up in an alternate future with Mike, who says it's been a decade since the ending of Part 4, which would place these events in 1998, and the tall man's taken over the Earth. And there's a spiky sphere, and Reg bounces back and forth from reality to reality for a while, and we get Mike's version of events after 88, and he tells us about the invasion, and there's a face-off in which the tall man is exploded, and depending upon how you want to interpret this ending, we either see Mike, Jody, and Reg team up in the apocalyptic reality, while the other reality Reg passes away with Mike and Jody at his side. It's kind of up to the viewer to decide if both realities exist, or if the invasion reality is just a figment of Reg's delusions, although a mid-credit sequence with the return of Rocky from the third film seemed to suggest that reality is definitely real, at least.
And we're back at the Casa de Myers for the final update of the night. We're going to check in with the Shape himself and see what his newest movie brought in terms of continuity. And I think you kind of know where this one is going to go, because this gets a little weird. And hey, Lonnie, get your ass away from there. Always wanted to say that.
Okay, so our final update is 2018's simply titled Halloween, which disrupts the series' continuity yet again. To recap, the original series of Halloween consisted of Halloween's 1 to 6 as a single timeline, and then the original, H2O, and Resurrection as a second, alternate timeline, and finally the Rob Zombie remake and sequel as a third continuity.
This one starts with true crime podcasters going to interview Michael Myers, and we find out that Loomis is dead, and we catch a glimpse of Mike's face, and it's clearly a while later. They only talk about that night, which is our first clue that we've reset once again, and only the first film exists, and none of the other sequels happened, so Michael's murder spree consisted of that one night back in 1978. They then go to talk to Laurie, who lives in a mini fortress, and we meet her daughter and her family, and they talk about how traumatized that Laurie is, and how their encounter haunts her life, but I don't know, maybe not live in the same town as his prison or something? I don't know, maybe that's just me. Anyway, no one in her family seems to care about her, or the fact that the man that almost killed her is being transferred to a prison, and are basically pretty lousy to her in general. And can I point out that Judy Greer is the mom in Halloween, Jurassic Parks, and Ant-Man, so she's basically the quintessential Hollywood mom at this point? So, Michael escapes and kills a kid, and it's Halloween night, and they say it's 40 years to the day, so in real time, 2018. And Michael kills a bunch more people, and no one still seems to give a damn about Laurie. Mikey kills a bunch of randoms, and here's something to think about. Picture Michael killing this girl and then just kind of sitting there, cutting the holes in this sheet. Michael's doctor turns out to be just as crazy as he is for some reason, but don't worry because that whole plot line isn't important since he's killed like 5 minutes later. And there's a final face-off at Laurie's house, and what a missed opportunity. You're telling me that you have Judy Greer shooting Michael Myers in the face with a one-liner, and you didn't take the chance to have her say, Say goodbye to these, Michael. It's a shame, really. So Laurie's house ends up being one of Jigsaw's traps, and they burn Michael to death, or I guess they assume because they drive away without ensuring that he's really, really dead. So let's just say that we can most likely expect another entry pretty soon.
So there you have it. It's 4 movies, or 4 updates to movies that worked out pretty well in between them. Leatherface actually works pretty well if you tie it to the first movie. Leprechaun works pretty well if you tie it to the first movie. Phantasm makes about as much sense as continuity-wise as Phantasm movies can make. It's kind of the point of them. And finally, Halloween, yeah. I mean, when you ignore every other bit of continuity, I guess it has to make sense. It works with the first one, so I guess that's all. I guess that's what they were going for. But all in all, these were pretty enjoyable. I hope you enjoyed seeing the updates. We're going to be doing some more of these in the future to catch up on some of these series that I'm a little bit behind on, and get you all caught up. But let me know what you thought of this one down below. Like and subscribe, do all that good stuff. Check out the patrons, because Patreon page is there, and you can help support this channel like they do, and I'd appreciate it. And in the meantime, I'll just say thank you for watching, and I'll see you in a little while for another great video. Thanks, guys. Bye.
On this week's episode, it is almost Halloween, so I figured it is high time to check out the Halloween series and figure out what unanswered questions there are in this film series. And there are plenty. On my watch through of the movie, I think I labeled down about 30-some questions, but I've narrowed it down to 13, and for something really special, almost every single question will feature a different location from the film series behind me. On this question, we have the original Michael Myers house.
Question number 1.
In the first film, Michael Myers knows how to drive a car. Since he's been held in Smith's Grove since he was a little kid, how did he learn to drive?
This is even partially addressed in the movie, as Wynn says that Michael doesn't know how to drive, and Loomis posits that someone gave him lessons. Now, since we're broken into several continuity, the answer to this is a little harder than it seems. In the continuity of the first 6 films, it's an easy answer, since it was revealed in Part 6 that Wynn was actually the mastermind of the Thorn cult and was behind Michael's evil in the first place. So it's pretty apparent that he would have prepped him for being out in the world. So the person that would have given him lessons would have been him. So, Loomis is actually right, and he's talking directly to the person that he's theorizing about. Now, that falls apart when we get to H2O in the 2018 version, since Wynn never reappears and there is no Thorn cult. So that's a bit trickier, but it's still not too hard to explain, I think. We have to theorize that Michael wasn't always in the facility and had to be in some sort of automobile from time to time, so it would just be a question of him being observant and watching Loomis or Wynn or whoever the driver was and noting how a car is worked. When we see Myers take the wheel as he escapes, he's not doing too many complicated things outside of steering and pressing the gas to go, which you could just figure out from watching someone. He looks a bit better at it the following day, so you can assume that he worked on it during the evening. Question number 2.
For this question, we're at the location of the former hardware store from the first film, because we're going to ask the important question of what was the real deal with what was up with that burglary.
So, being the timeline guy, this one really bothers me because the whole thing makes no logical sense.
Bear with me here.
We see Michael outside the school and he's wearing the Shatner. A little while later, all the kids get out of school and we see him again and he still has the mask. So if we figure that school lets out around 3 o'clock or so, and the class that we saw was even the final period or so, then he has the mask no later than 2 p.m. It's even possible that he has it on earlier that day as well when Laurie is on her way to school, but we never actually see it on him, but judging from the breathing, he's probably wearing it. Then we see Laurie go home and Annie calls her to tell her that she'll pick her up at 6:30, which we then see. Shortly after, we see the girls drive by the hardware store and it's been broken into and the alarm is still going off and people are standing around outside like this was something that just happened. They even managed to get the alarm off while Laurie and Annie are there, so I find it hard to believe that it wasn't able to be shut off. So the absolute least amount of time that could have elapsed between Michael breaking into this store and this point would have been about 4 hours or so, although that would probably place the store as being open since it would have had to been in the middle of the day, so either he broke in early in the morning before the store opened, and it took the police about 6 hours to respond, and the store was just open all day long with an alarm that was going off that just happened to turn off right when the girls pull up.
Or, possibly, it wasn't Michael that broke into that store in the first place.
The only things that were stolen were some masks. Not a mask, some masks, although Michael could have gotten his mask from anywhere. Also stolen were a knife and some rope. We never really see Michael use the rope, so we can't even be sure that he has it in the first place, and let's face it, that knife could have come from his old kitchen. Annie's kitchen, or even stolen from the trucker that he killed. The store probably closed at 6 p.m., was broken into shortly afterwards, and we're seeing the events soon after that. It's really the only way I can figure this time frame out, and just lends itself to the dangerous nature of this night, in particular that other thieves and vandals are about. Question number 3.
For this question, we're actually at the intersection where Ben Schramer got hit. He got hit because he carelessly walked out into the road. And the question we're going to ask is about Halloween 2, which upped the violence of the series in a pretty big way. But what was up with the film's most disturbing bit? The kid with the razor blade in his mouth.
So, back in the day, there was this urban legend that every parent in the world was scared of that stated that someone was going to stick razor blades in kids' candy on Halloween in order to harm them. The fear of that, or poisoning the candy, was so prevalent that parents would always make sure to check their kids' candy before they ate any. The scene in the movie doesn't actually tie into anything else that's going on, and it's seemingly just included to emphasize the mythic qualities of Halloween and the tropes of the night, but what if there was more to it? In respect to the original continuity, we know that there was something bigger happening that night as the Thorn constellation is in the sky, and it's most likely having an effect on more than just Michael. The scrawling of Sam Hain on the blackboard definitely indicates something more than just aimless murder, and the presence of the wild mob outside Myers' house again seems to indicate some extra happening with the discussion of tribalism. The razor blade scene is just another example of the concept that this particular Halloween is cursed by druids, which doesn't sound scary at all when I say it out loud, but it shows that there is more to fear on this night than just Michael Myers. Question number 4.
And hey, speaking of part 2, what happened to Jimmy?
He's kinda set up to be the male lead of the film with his puppy dog eyes towards Laurie, and it sure seems like he's at least going to be important. But then he slips and falls in a blood puddle and knocks himself out and doesn't show up again until later on in the film in a car, in which he passes out again. Or does he die? It's kind of unclear, and he's not seen again unless you've seen the TV version in which the character is shown to have survived, but I guess that's debatable if you want to consider that canon. Keep in mind, that's not just an added scene. There were several more scenes with Jimmy looking for Laura, and he doesn't just slip on blood in that version. The blood slip isn't there, and instead Jimmy injures his head when he's knocked back by the explosion, so it's apparent that there were a whole separate set of circumstances in that version. So no, in the theatrical version, his death is absolutely up in the air, and add a comment about there being 10 victims so far seems to indicate that they haven't finished counting the dead, so his death is unconfirmed. Keep in mind that there's also a theory that Jimmy does survive, and that he's actually Jamie's dad, although there's not really a lot of evidence towards that. His last name is never actually given, so that's not really a clue, and when Jamie looks at a picture of herself as a baby with her dad, it doesn't really look like him. Granted, there'd be a few year age difference, but not enough to justify that different of a look. Some people have theorized that this might actually be Jimmy's younger brother then, but I think it's more likely that it's a separate character, as Laurie doesn't really seem that terribly interested in theatrical version Jimmy anyway. Hell, even TV version seems more relieved that he's alive more than she's in love. As to whether he survived, I'm gonna go ahead and say yes, mainly because I think the TV version at least showed that they had an interest in the character, and he never really came across Michael, who most certainly would have killed him. He mostly stays out of the action, probably had a concussion, but I'm not in the camp that they got together afterwards, or if they did, he definitely wasn't Jamie's father. Question number 5.
For this question, we are at the hedge that Michael hides behind, and we're going to ask that question about Halloween 3, which ends on a pretty crazy cliffhanger. So, what most likely happens afterwards?
Would the TV commercial even be successful? Not nearly on the level that they say it would. We're shown kids with masks all over the country, but the action of our film is set in California, and it's clear that as Cochran and crew are there that it hasn't begun yet, and he says that the giveaway that would trigger the masks is at 9. So for that to be simulcast across the country, the absolute earliest that it would be is 9 o'clock and as late as midnight on the East Coast. Unless they aired it earlier on the East, but then you'd figure that when kids started dying, there'd be calls and alerts, and they'd have to cut the feed, so the fact that the ads were still airing in California kinda rules that out. Then, once you eliminate all of the kids whose parents wouldn't let them stay up that late, kids who just didn't want silver shamrock masks, kids who couldn't afford it, kids whose parents wouldn't let them watch a horror marathon on TV, and then take into account the fact that they got it down to one channel, and you see in the movie how they have the kid at the end just switch the channel knob by hand. Well, that's because that's how most people changed the channel back then. Remote controls were around, but they really weren't that commonplace. Eliminate all the parents and kids that just didn't get up to change the channel or didn't change it in time to catch the full coded message. Oh, and eliminate all the kids that wouldn't actually be wearing their masks, because I know the channel said to win the giveaway you had to be wearing it, but would anyone really know? I know that I took my costume off the second I walked in the door after getting candy, and I sure as hell wasn't sitting around the house later just watching movies in it.
And besides, now we know how people feel about wearing a mask when you tell them that they have to.
Stop it! Stop it! Stop it! Stop it! Stop it!
Question number 6.
For this question, I'm actually at Laurie's house, but I don't have a pumpkin to sit with, but I think we'll be okay. Because we're talking about Halloween 3, which actually famously didn't feature Michael Myers, but can it be in the same continuity?
Well, it appears as if the makers of the original 6 at least gave it a shot, so I guess so will I. You see, there's a couple of links, tenuous as they may be, and although I think that they're not connected, I'm gonna make a case that they are.
Because making stuff up to cover holes in movies is my jam.
First of all, you have the Druid connection and Samhain, which was first introduced in the second movie, and of course elaborated on in 4, 5, and 6, primarily in 6. When that film introduces the Druid cult of Thorn that exists to, I guess, generate evil energy through Halloween or something, it opens the possibility that Cochran was a member, or at least a member of an offshoot cult with the same intentions. If there's one Druid cult in Illinois stirring up troubles, there's more than likely another one in California up to something similar. And when I say something similar, I mean that one's using constellations to create a soulless killer on Halloween, while the other's using Stonehenge to make masks turn kids' heads into bug factories.
So, you know, similar.
As further evidence that the cults are connected, early in Part 3, a Mrs. Blankenship is referenced, and do you think that she might be connected to the Druids?
Right you are, Ken.
Of course, there's also a Mrs. Blankenship in Part 6, and she's revealed to be a cult member, so there's the possibility that this is the same person, and Miss B was connected to both plots with about 15 or so years between them. If the two universes are connected, I think you could assume that they were successful in shutting down the third station and stopping Cochran's plan, or at least limiting it to the point that there wasn't a huge tragedy, since something like that would have been a national event that would most likely at least be talked about in future Halloweens, but no one seems to mention it or have any concern about masks. Now, the only thing that interferes with this is the watching of Halloween on the TV that they're watching, insinuating that the movie is just fiction in this universe. But it's also possible that someone made a film version of Michael's escapades in universe, much like the Stab films in Scream. It seems a little weird to no one to mention it, though, in the next couple of movies, especially when Michael shows back up, like saying, hey, it's the guy from that movie, but it's also possible that the film version just wasn't that successful, even if it was an awesome movie.
You know, like Halloween 3.
Happy Halloween.
Question number 7.
On this question, we're actually in the alleyway where Michael overhears Loomis talking to the sheriff, bragging about how many times he shot him. And Halloween 4 brought back Michael in a big way, revealing that he survived the ending of Part 2. But the question is, how does he have eyes?
In the end of Part 2, Michael has both of his eyes shot out so that he's blind and is blown up and burnt to a crisp. Now, he's survived gunshots before and has shown to be able to take a rather large amount of damage, and they frequently show that his skin is horribly scarred from the fire. I will take a second to say how ridiculous it is that he still has bandages on in the beginning of the film, though. They put bandages like this on burn victims when the burns are fresh to protect the exposed skin from the elements, but I mean, 10 years in, I highly doubt that his skin wouldn't just be huge strips of mangled scar tissues by that point. It would be beyond healed, and there'd be no reason for it to be bandaged.
But I digress. Let's get back to the eyes.
Now, since the 2018 version ignores Part 2, it doesn't need to be addressed, but in the original continuity in H2O, it definitely does. So there's no way to get around this without a straightforward acceptance of Michael being supernatural. Even if you hand-wave the fact that Laurie shot him in both eyes and bullets just don't stop there, so you'd have to assume that those slugs went to his brain, right? So the shape is capable of surviving 2 direct bullets to the brain. I guess you could maybe say that both bullets didn't go into his eyes and both shots grazed Michael's head but not actually going in. And maybe, I guess maybe he was blinded by blood going in his eyes? It really doesn't look like that, but I guess that it's a possibility, but there's no damage to the mask. Then, in parts 4 and 5, we can see that he's fine, isn't blinded, And in part 5, we even see his eye, and it's intact. It even looks like his facial burns healed up as well. So, over the course of 10 years, he's burned enough that he still needs bandages, but 1 year later, and those burns look like light scarring. The only explanation is that the dude supernaturally heals up using the power of the thorn, as much as I hate typing and saying that sentence. The answer is a little less clear with H2O, since that continuity doesn't embrace the supernatural elements, so I'm not sure how Michael has his eyes back, as well as not having any burn scars on his face or arms, unless you want to take into account the whole imposter theory that the Michael in that movie wasn't actually Michael, but a mere copycat killer.
Maybe we'll talk about that some other time.
Question number 8.
For this question, we're actually at the high school that Laurie goes to. I can't get any closer than this due to that damn restraining order. Just kidding, they're actually filming something for real here, so I'm going to leave them go and do that. But the question I need to ask is actually about part 5, because in part 5, Loomis is kind of portrayed to be a little bit of a psychopath, but the question that I have is, wasn't he always?
Let's look at part 5 for a minute. Loomis basically just shouts at Jamie all the time, physically manhandles her, and finally places her between Michael and himself, using her as bait. It's not a good look for the Doc, and thankfully he's treated a little more favorably in part 6, but let's go back to the beginning for a second. His entire strategy for confronting Michael is to just hang out outside his house all night with a gun. It's only after being there for a while that he bothers to look around and spot the car that's just been sitting there all day. Then, in the second film, when he's not shouting at people about shooting Michael 6 times,
I shot him 6 times. I shot him 6 times. I shot him 6 times.
An hour ago, I stood up and fired 6 shots into him. He just got up and walked away.
Couldn't have shot him 6 times.
he's waving his gun around needlessly and carelessly. He basically indirectly causes the death of Ben Tramer, a completely innocent person, after pointing his gun right at him and causing him to run into the street. How he wasn't arrested for this, especially after it was revealed that it was never Michael to begin with, is pretty unclear, especially when Sam doesn't seem to show any sort of remorse for his role in the events. Then, to further show just how unhinged that he actually is, he shoots a gun from the back seat of a car out the window, shattering it, gambling the lives of everyone in the car if the extremely loud sound of a gunshot and glass breaking would have caused the driver to crash. Add to the fact that he blows up the hospital in order to kill Michael.
Let's just look at this for a second.
Michael is blind, 2 bullets in his skull somehow, and he can't see. Jamie has escaped the room, and Loomis is still in there with him. He doesn't know for sure if there's other people in the hospital nearby. He just blows it all up. And there's babies there. More than a couple of babies. I mean, you'd have to assume their mothers are there somewhere too, right? I know they don't show them. But it's not like moms just have babies and then peace out and say, "I'll come pick up that guy tomorrow." The amount of innocent people that he could have potentially killed could have been equal to Michael's own rampage for all that he knew. But he figured it was worth it to take out Michael because, let's face it, Sam is probably equally as crazy and a bit of a psycho. Question number 9.
And here we are at the elementary school where Tommy gets picked on by some bullies, and that bully gets picked on by Michael Myers. We're going to ask the question about number 6, because number 6 has some pretty questionable things happening in it, but the most egregious one of all is that ending. What is up with that ending?
Let's look at it. Ant-Man injects Michael with reagent and then bashes his head into a pulp, which looks pretty lethal, but you know that it isn't, and then everyone escapes. But Loomis goes back in, claiming he has unfinished business. Then, all we see is Michael's mask on the ground, with Loomis screaming in the background. Now, if you're only familiar with the producer's cut, things are obviously a bit different. In that version, Michael is also gone, but Wynn is under the mask. I guess having switched outfits. I should mention Mikey didn't have his face bashed in this version and was simply trapped by the power of druid runes.
It's complicated. Kind of dumb.
Wynn taunts Sam and places a curse of thorn on him while Michael becomes the new man in black. There's a bunch of gray area there, but not nearly as much as the theatrical cut, which doesn't really reveal anything, just that the doc has something to scream about. I should also point out that this ending was necessary because in the time between the original version and the reshoots, Donald Pleasance passed away and couldn't be a part of the action, which is why Sam is unconscious for most of that version. So as it stands, we can narrow it down to 3 options. The first possibility is that Michael was just gone, vanished, and Sam is screaming at the idea that he has once again missed a chance to end Michael's evil reign forever. Of course, just leaving the door open for another sequel. The second possibility is that the scream you're hearing is Michael killing Loomis, which obviously would have been handy if they had just made Halloween 7 instead of going with the reboot H2O route, as the doc would have had to be out of the series at that point. His mask being on the ground doesn't really mean much in this version unless it just got so glooped up he needed a replacement. The third option, which is the version I believe in, mainly just because this entry did wrap up the original continuity, is that the sound you are hearing is Loomis finishing the job, much like he said he was going to do, and finishing off Michael for good. The curse had been broken, the mask on the ground represents the end of the character, and this version of the universe is brought to a close with a final ending. Question number 10.
For this next question, we're on the street where the girls are walking back from school and we get the whole speed kills interaction with Michael driving down the road. And we're actually talking about rebooting continuities. So H2O, does it actually do that? Or can it fit in the original continuity?
There's been some debate about this entry actually being a part of the 1 through 6 universe, using the car crash thing to link it. You see, in Part 4, it's revealed that Laurie Strode and her husband died in a car crash just 1 year prior to the film's events. In H2O, it's revealed that Laurie actually faked her death via car crash in order to go into hiding, so it's been floated that the crash described in Part 4 was actually the crash that faked her death.
No. Put that theory away.
Part 4 takes place in 1988, and Laurie's crash would have been in 1987. H2O takes place in 1998, and Laurie has John, who is turning 17, so he would have been born in 1981. Now, depending on who you believe, because Jamie's age differs from movie to movie, she's either 7 or 8 years old in Part 4, so she'd have been born in either 1980 or 1981, and since John was born in 81, it's more likely it'd be 80, so she's 1 year older than John, and they're really similar in age. So for this to be the same continuity, you'd have to assume that Laurie was perfectly cool with taking John with her and leaving Jamie behind, and then not really ever mentioning her again. When Michael shows up back in her life and talks about her past, she never mentions Jamie and doesn't seem to care about her well-being, and that's because in this universe, she doesn't exist. The continuities aren't linked, and the car crash thing is just symmetry between universes. I mean, unless you hate Laurie and think she's a terrible person, because that's the only way this theory works. Plus, Jamie would have remembered that she had a brother that was younger than her.
I mean, she's like 7 or 8 years old. She's not an idiot.
Question number 11.
And for this question, we're actually hanging out at Annie's house, and we're going to ask that important question. Since we're speaking about John, whatever happened to him?
He's alive at the ending of H2O, but then he's never seen again. We never see his reaction to the events that follow, and we don't get to see how he responded to his mother being committed and then killed. Laurie tells him to go far away before coming back into the school, but it's apparent that he didn't really listen, considering both he and Molly are present when Laurie steals the ambulance. Now, he's not shown again after this moment, but in Halloween Resurrection, This serial killer-obsessed patient is giving a rundown of Mikey's history, and he states that he killed 4 students at Hillcrest Academy in 1998. Not 4 people, students. Now, over the course of H2O, Michael does kill the 2 kids and Nurse Chambers, and then Laurie's boyfriend, Will, but Will wasn't a student, and the 3 in the intro weren't at the academy. Since he specifically states that Myers killed 4 students at the academy, it would seem that we're missing 2. So there's 2 ways to take that, and the first is that Michael killed both John and Molly while in the paramedic outfit before slipping away. Now, the other option is that they faked John and Molly's death in order to slip away once it was revealed that Michael was still alive, and this is the theory that I'm taking. Law enforcement on hand would probably have guessed that he would have continued to come after John, so they reported him as dead in order to continue Laurie's ruse to stay in hiding. So in that continuity, John's probably still out there somewhere, possibly still rocking those ridiculous bangs. Question number 12.
For this question, we're going back to the very beginning. This is the street where they did the establishing shot showing Haddonfield. And we're going to ask the question, since we're speaking about the beginning of Halloween Resurrection coming from H2O, why didn't that paramedic just take the damn mask off?
Okay, so the end of H2O was supposed to be pretty final, what with Laurie chopping off Michael's whole head and all. It's even more of a solid resolution than part 2, really, but they needed a way out of it, and apparently that way out was Michael having a paramedic take his place and crushing his windpipe so he couldn't talk. Problem is, this whole thing doesn't make any sense, plus it makes Laurie into a killer. Her stealing the ambulance to ensure that her brother is dead for sure was a pretty rash decision and was obviously frowned upon by the authorities at the school, but us, the audience, was on her side because we knew that Michael wasn't really dead. Having it not be Michael kind of makes her out to be an idiot, and her impulsiveness ends up killing some rando. Keep in mind, Michael could not have known that the chain of events would have gone this way and was just looking for an escape, and let's face it, the only reason things went the way they did is because everyone's dumb. I guess Laurie's decision could be rationalized or something, but maybe instead of making the rash action then, she could have just done it earlier, right after LL stopped her from delivering a killing blow.
I mean, whatever. This whole thing is just...
But this chain of events requires a paramedic to wake up from being unconscious, not try to make any sounds, because I know his larynx was crushed, but that doesn't prevent you from making any sounds at all. They would just be garbled grunts. And then he wakes up in a body bag and then slowly and menacingly unzips his way out and then attacks the person behind the wheel of the car driving him. And then, after the crash, and after he's pinned to the tree, he still just doesn't pull the mask off. He reaches up to touch it, so it's clear that he's aware that it's on, but he just doesn't take it off. He makes no effort whatsoever to communicate what's going on, and come on, we know the real reason is because this was never intended to be anybody other than Michael Myers here, and this whole thing is just what the kids call an ass pull, but can we rationalize it?
Well, that's what we do here, so sure.
The shock and the trauma of the events, especially the crash, gave him a concussion, and the poor guy just no longer could comprehend what was going on, and his sheer confusion prevented his actions.
That's all I got.
Question number 13.
For this question, we're actually at the other Myers house. This is actually the Michael Myers house from Rob Zombie's Halloween, which is actually still boarded up. Kind of spooky, I guess. But we're actually going to ask a question about the 2018 Halloween movie, because I have enough questions about this movie to fill its own video. But the most important question I have is, why didn't Michael kill that baby?
Look, I'm just going to say right away that the last thing that I want to see is a dead baby, so I'm really, really glad that it didn't go that way. But for a killing machine made of pure, unadulterated evil, it seems like it should have. We know from earlier in the movie that Michael isn't shy about killing children, as evidenced by the escape scene, and it's not like he doesn't see it, as he looks straight at it. The director David Gordon Green actually talked about it and stated that it's actually an ethical choice that Michael makes, and it's the one ethical thing that he does. But does that really line up with the character that they've created? Well, kinda. In terms of the series, we've seen Mike in the presence of plenty of trick-or-treating kids that he likely had an opportunity to kill and didn't, and the only times that we see him go against that is chasing young Jamie, his niece, who he was supernaturally compelled to kill, and the dancing kid, who was basically in his way as he was trying to get back to Haddonfield. So basically, kids are off the menu, unless they directly get in his way. The baby was in the crib completely harmless to him, so he didn't need to kill it. Bonus question number 14.
Which Halloween movie is the best one?
I think you knew this was coming. Stay tuned for Dead Last of the Halloween series, where we're going to find out which is the best Halloween movie in just 1 week's time.
So there you have it. It is 13 questions about a whole bunch of movies. Some of them make sense, some of them do not. I did my best. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this. Let me know down in the comments what you thought. If you have any alternate answers to some of these questions, or if you have other questions that you want to see answered in the future. I'm sure there's enough material in the Halloween movies for me to do another one of these videos in the future. So let me know that down below. Just let me know in general what you thought, and like and comment and share, do all that good stuff. Subscribe to the channel, please. If you have a chance, go to the Patreon page. It's right over here, patreon.com/movietimelines. These guys right here are my patrons. They are awesome because they help keep this channel alive and help keep it going to bring content like this to you. And I thank you guys for watching it. And, you know, we'll see you in a little while for another great video. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
Happy Halloween and welcome to this episode of Dead Last. And I wonder what movie series we're going to be covered. What would be more appropriate than covering the Fast and Furious? I mean, the Halloween movies. We're talking about the legacy of Mr. Michael Myers, and we're going to rank all of the films, including the remakes and the side stories and the weird, bizarre trip that this series has become. How we do this is people send me in rankings. If you are a patron on Patreon, you get to send me in your ranking, and you can rank the movie from dead last all the way up to first. These guys right here were kind enough to participate in this episode, and they sent me in their rankings. You can too by going to patreon.com and becoming a patron. You can weigh in your opinion, and just like these guys did. So thank you guys for sending me your list. And also, I have my panel. Some of these voices are going to be familiar, and we have a new entry, but let's start with the most important to me, my wife, the Mrs. Movie Timeline, Christy.
Hello.
As we've said before, Christy is a costume designer for film and television. You can check out her work by checking out the groundbreaking Lifetime film, Double Daddy. And after you watch Double Daddy, don't forget its sequel. What is it?
Double Mommy.
Next up, we have the host of the awesome website, HalloweenShindig.com, and the amazing podcast, Shindig Radio. It is Mr. Derek. What's happening, sir?
Hello, everyone. I know it's me again. I'm sorry. You're probably getting sick of me. But it's a Halloween. I couldn't bow out of the Halloween. I had to come in and talk about these movies with you. So here I am again.
Next up, we have a new entry to our panel. It is Brawlin' Bo Cooper. Welcome to the show.
What's up, guys? Thanks for having me. I appreciate it, Josh. And I'm excited to talk about the most amazing franchise in all of horror.
Bo, if you're not familiar with him, he is a former pro wrestler. He is with Trick or Treat Studios.
and he has a fantastic show that you have to check out on Instagram called Hops and Horror. I'm going to let you talk about it.
Yeah, man. We have a show every Wednesday that we upload on Instagram. It's just me and my buddy Rob Novelli, and we review a classic horror movie and we pair it with a craft beer, and we sit there and drink some beers and talk about the films, and hopefully get a bunch of fans to appreciate it as much as your fans do.
Well, and talking about appreciation, it's kind of hard to see your room behind you, but that room is just jam-packed with Halloween memorabilia stuff. It's like Michael Myers Halloween mask everywhere. It's fantastic, right? So if anybody in the comments is trying to doubt and say that anybody's not a real fan, look at this guy's room. Look at it. That is a fan.
Bo's legit.
Well, so let's kick off the rankings, and the show's called Dead Last, so we have to find out which movie is Dead Last, the poorest performing movie. And when you're talking about the Halloween movies, there's some pretty strong contenders in there. There's quite a few that could possibly be Dead Last, but ultimately the clear winner was Halloween Resurrection with 195 points. I should point out the highest possible score here, if everybody voted at Dead Last, would be 220 points, and it got 195, so pretty low score. It was ranked Dead Last 8 times. Its highest ranking that it got was 7th place. Out of the 4 of us, Bo, you actually had this ranked the lowest. You had it in 10th place. Christy had 9th place. And Derek, you and I actually ranked this higher than anybody else here. We both gave them 8s. But none of us had it Dead Last, which I thought was pretty interesting. But Bo, obviously this one was pretty bad in your eyes. What did you not like about it?
I feel that the whole thing with the, trying to do the camera zoom in with the whole almost like POV view and trying to make it almost like a haunted house going in there and the sleepoverness of trying to, resurrect Michael, and just the acting wasn't the greatest. And I mean, it's one of those situations where, nothing against Busta Rhymes, but I don't know why he was even trying to be in a Halloween movie to begin with. The mask was okay. The acting with the teenagers and everything, it just seemed very cheeseballish. It wasn't anything that reminded me of a Halloween film from the previous films.
One thing that I think is going to kind of come up a lot when we talk about this list is the quality of the mask, because I noticed it actually affected how I felt about the movie more than I thought it would. And yeah, this mask was like, it's all right. It's just weird contours. But Christy, you also gave this a lower score, not as low as Bo, but you gave it a 9. So there was some pretty deep dislike for Halloween Resurrection. What was it?
I actually did not like the movie at all, and I was actually kind of angry at it until Busta Rhymes started doing Kung Fu, and then it just became insanely entertaining.
He does Kung Fu kick him straight out of a window, which is, at least it's something.
I don't understand the fennel.
You ever taste a 40-year-old fennel?
I don't. It's gotta be rotten.
That's strange.
What?
It smells fresh.
Michael Myers keeps fennel in the basement.
There's a lot of things going on in there. And
fennel's like it's a seed. So I don't know. I guess it could go bad. I don't know, but I don't know what the difference between fresh and unfresh fennel would be to tip somebody off.
There's 4 people on this panel right now. Raise your hand if you smell fennel, if you would know if it was good or bad. That's what I thought. Oh, Derek, you would know stale fennel?
I don't even know what fennel is.
Well, and the guy is so definitive about it, too, because he sniffs it. He's like, this smells fresh. The thing about this one, because I gave it an 8, which isn't super low on this list, but I really dislike it. I think the only reason why I ranked it higher than a few of the other ones on the list is I disliked them more. For some reason, I'm a little bit more forgiving about a movie that, doesn't really try to be great and fails, more so than a movie that tries to be great and fails. And I guess we'll talk about one or two of those in the next couple of rankings. Derek, how do you?
No, this movie doesn't appear as though anybody gave a shit, because I don't think anybody working on this movie did. I think it's objectively perhaps the worst Halloween movie. I mean, you could just, if it was your dead last, like, I totally get it, but I'm with Josh. There are Halloween movies that I dislike more than Resurrection, and at least Resurrection is like, what am I watching? What's going on here? It's like a reality show in the Myers house. Like, why is he even interested in killing them? Because they're there? Like, it's just so out of place with the rest of the series that I almost don't care about it, and it's just kind of funny and mildly entertaining for being a bad movie. And like I said, there's other Halloweens I dislike more for more legitimate reasons than that one's just stupid.
Yeah, so moving on to some of those movies that we do dislike more, let's go on to number 10. Number 10 on our list with 191 points is Rob Zombie's Halloween 2. So this only had 4 less points than Halloween Resurrection, so it was a very, very strong contender for dead last. It was ranked dead last 9 times, so it was actually ranked dead last 1 more time than Resurrection was, but its highest ranking was 4th place. 2 people ranked it in 4th place. 3 of us, me, Bo, and Christy, all ranked this dead last. And Derek, you ranked it very, very close in 10th place. So all 4 of us had a lot of dislike for this film. But I want to hear why. I want to hear. Derek's the only outlier in this one with 10th place, which isn't drastic, but I want to hear from you.
I mean, I don't. Obviously, it's 10th place. I don't like Rob Zombie's Halloween 2, but I like it slightly more than his Halloween. 2 gets a slight edge for being not trying to be a remake, kind of doing its own thing, and just sort of, it's more Halloween-y too. They go to that party. That's pretty cool. I feel like it has more Halloween ambiance. I kind of like what they're doing in the beginning, where they're sort of remaking Halloween 2, but no, it's a fake out. It's not really Halloween 2. That's just a dream. But yeah, it ends up just being kind of a shitty Rob Zombie horror movie rather than a shitty Halloween remake. So yeah, that is why I rank it slightly higher than his original remake.
Christy, how do you feel about that dream sequence in the beginning?
I was like angry. I'm like, why did you just waste 25 minutes?
I definitely do.
Honestly, I thought the whole movie was trash. Like,
well, the weird thing is I feel like I'm normally the guy on these rankings that is rewarding the films that do something different. I mean, I'm the one that kind of defended Jason Goes to Hell. So I kind of thought that I would have more to defend on this because it's a Halloween movie that really doesn't feel like a Halloween movie. Like, he's clearly trying to do something different than just the formula. But the problem is what he's doing is just terrible. And the thing that irks me is that he got a lot of really cool people to be in this. I mean, Margot Kidder shows up to pop in and just be terrible people. And I hated everyone in it. I hated everything about it. This one was absolute torture for me, and I think that, like, if I was putting this up against other dead last things that we've ranked dead last, this is still the worst.
I think all horror fans gave Rob Zombie a chance in the first one and said, okay, we'll take your story, we'll take your mindset, and we'll run with it, and we'll appreciate it for what it was worth. But why go into having the mask fall off, showing more of the actor Tyler May's face and becoming a hobo and living out there in the streets and traveling and walking? It's just, I really was not too happy with the way they made Loomis's character in the second one. I mean, he's trying to be like this cocky, funny joke cracking old pervert in a weird way, and it's just it's not Halloween, dude.
We're moving on to number 9, which I guess should come to no surprise, because I guess that everyone is saying that the only thing that is worse than the Rob Zombie Halloween series is Halloween Resurrection, because number 9 is Rob Zombie's Halloween with 169 points, although that's a fairly big jump from 191 to 169. It was ranked dead last 3 times. Its highest ranking that it got. Somebody gave it 3rd place, and they gave me the justification that saying that they know that was controversial, but he thinks it was very refreshing the way that Michael was made scary as hell. out of the four of us, Derek, you were one of the three people that ranked it dead last. Christy, very, very close to dead last with 10th place. I gave it 9th, and Bo, you actually get the best out of the four of us with 8th place, so I'm going to let you defend that.
I think that a whole new generation of kids wanted to see Michael Myers because they probably weren't aware of 1978's film. So they've heard of Halloween, you know, the icon growing up, but they probably didn't sit there and really appreciate the 1978 film for what it really is worth. The movie is pretty cool for brutalness. I liked how, you know, how he was pretty brutal in the film. You know, he definitely had a whole new attitude. Tyler Mane did a great job, you know, playing Michael. Seeing a lot of the cool actors that, you know, are surrounded Michael in the film. You know, you got your Danny Trejos, you got your, you know, Brad Dourifs, you got your
Ken Farrell popping in there.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, exactly. But like I said, they should have left it at part one.
Derek, this one was a dead last for you.
I mean, it's all the reasons that you guys don't like Halloween 2, right? But I feel like they apply also to Halloween 1, but you have the added whatever of trying to remake John Carpenter's great Halloween, which, I mean, yeah, he tries to do something different. He tries to give Michael a backstory, but I think it's the lamest backstory that you could give Michael Myers. Like, he's just a little weenie kid with a shitty family who got picked on at school. Now he makes masks and he's killing people. It's like, you just made Michael Myers unscary and uncool, and you spend half of your running time going into that. And then you give me a really rushed, sort of like Bo's saying, it's brutal, but I feel like Michael just kind of turned into Jason. You know, it's flipping the script on it, but I don't really like the way it's doing that.
When you have part of it, the original mystique of the original is that Michael doesn't have a backstory, right? That's the whole thing. He doesn't have a reason. So you have this movie that's going to give him a reason, which I don't mind. But then when that reason is the same thing that you've seen in like 100 other like serial killer, like starting their career off, it was the same thing. It was just the abusive mom, abusive dad, mom's like bottomed out, blah blah blah, picked on by kids in school. We've seen it.
And that's my problem with it, is I don't want to feel bad for Mike Myers. Like, I just want him to be a psychopath. And then it was so unclear, because in the beginning it seemed like he was killing people that were bad. So it's like, okay, like my stepdad was an asshole, so I slashed his throat, you know, and then
you want to applaud him almost.
Yeah, and then like he killed the bully, and then I saw the uncut version, which like his escape scene made even less sense, and it was just completely uncalled for violence that did nothing to move the story along. But at that part, I was like, okay, so he's going to kill these people that are bad, but then he just kills everybody. So I'm like, why did I just spend all this time hearing his backstory if it doesn't influence who he kills? And you know what? And like, yeah, the white trash part of it, like the fact that it was just any city USA, you know, made it scarier. But then it's like, of these people that just scream at each other, and I'm like, I hate all of you, you know, and it's just like trash on trash on trash on trash.
I just wanted more from Michael. Even if it was some weird, you know, druid, whatever they make it up to be, you know? Like, to me, that's stupid too, but like, it's cooler than he makes masks and he's sad.
We're moving on to number 8. If I were to say the worst mask in Halloween, I hope that you're thinking of Halloween 5 with 153 points, which, believe it or not, was never ranked dead last. Nobody ranked it dead last, although it was ranked 10th place twice. 2 people did give it 10th. The highest ranking it had, 2 people did give it 5th place. There's a highest and a lowest right on our panel here, as I was one of the people that gave it 10th place because I hate Halloween 5. Christy, you liked it a little bit more than that. You gave it 8th place. Bo, a little lower with 6th place. And Derek is one of the 2 people that ranked it a 5. Derek, defend Halloween 5, please.
I mean, I can't defend Halloween 5. Halloween 5's not a good movie, but Halloween 5 does have 2 things going for it that I think make it better than the ones I like less. One of them is batshit crazy Sam Loomis, who spends the entire film yelling at a 9-year-old girl and uses her as bait to catch a serial killer. It's off the rails. He's crazy. He's screaming at her the entire movie. And then ultimately it's an 80s slasher. And to me, it just feels right. It feels more like a Halloween film and a proper 80s slasher film than anything from the 90s or the 2000s, where I think, well, I would rather put on Halloween 5 than the remake. You know what I mean?
Out of all of them, it's one of the hardest ones for me. And the whole reason why I hate it is because I truly feel as if they just made Halloween 4, people liked it, and they're like, well, what would you do for part 5? And they're just like, the same thing. Just do the same exact movie again. It's Michael Myers coming after Jamie Lloyd again, the sheriff and Loomis teaming up again, the sheriff getting distracted and having to go somewhere else and not being there to stop Michael again. It's like every single note of the fourth one is just repeated, and he's wearing that stupid, like, weird mask.
Yeah, there he is, Al Pacino.
There it is. There it is.
Yeah. But, we got to talk about the fact that, Nick Gregorio, who's an amazing, artist, they had to do something with this nose piece because I believe Don Shanks broke his nose, and I think that they had to put on a little bit of appliance here. But, I mean, people complain about Part 4 mask. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of 5. I don't think 5 is anywhere good as 4, even though 4 is pretty blank as well. But I want to hear you guys' opinion. What about this mask, though? I mean, this is Part 5 too.
Oh yeah. And when they did do that switch up for one scene of Halloween 5, I almost just wished that they had been like, this is Michael Myers now. He's just this weird hobo.
I enjoy it for what it's worth. I like the continuation of it. I just wish they would have kept Jamie a little bit evil. I don't know why. If they're going to do such a big ending with her killing her mother and having her uncle transfer into the soul, maybe he should have kidnapped her, or something should have happened at the end where she just, escapes, and then maybe show the progression of why she, had that happen to her, and then get better through maybe Loomis or a hospital or whatever. But the fact that it just went from her being evil, killing her whole family, a big shocker, to her being deaf, or not deaf, mute, is kind of weird to me. I mean, it just, and then you got the annoying Tina.
Tina just I couldn't watch it. She was just so bad. And I hate that whole cliche type crazy girl character. I don't know.
And it's such a shame too, because what's her name from 4 is great. And
her sister
for like a hot second, and then they murder her, and then you're left with Tina, and you're like, what happened?
Well, so then that takes us up to number 7 as we get up into the higher portions of this list, although it's not too high as of yet. But number 7 is a movie that was kind of weird in how people thought of it, and we're talking about Halloween 6, The Curse of Michael Myers. It had 142 points, and believe it or not, was not ranked dead last at all, which that surprised me because I thought this movie had a lot worse reputation than it did. Although it was ranked in 10th place 3 times, its highest score was 5th place, which was ranked 7 times. 7 people gave this 5th place, which is why I think it's weird that it's actually ranked as number 7. I felt like it probably would have been a little bit higher. And interestingly enough, out of those 5 people that ranked it 5th place, Bo, Christy, and I were 3 of them. And Derek, you were pretty close with 6th place. So I think we liked this movie more than, I guess, the general consensus.
I don't know. I thought this one was just fun and its wackiness, with the whole weird curse cult thing or whatever. But the one thing I don't understand, which kind of makes me like it more, is just what casting director ever would be like, okay, we need a creepy guy. Oh, I got the perfect guy. Paul Rudd. Wait until you see him. Like, I mean, he's like the most likable actor. I feel like he's like one of the most likable people like in the world. Like, why would you put him in this role?
The mask was actually pretty awesome. I enjoyed the mask. It had an evil look to it. It was something, you know, that you didn't really see in the previous ones because it had just a really evil look. I enjoyed the overall direction that it was going with explaining, you know, why Michael Myers possibly was the way he was. People were still questioning, like, there's got to be a reason. So for them to tease, you know, the fact that, you know, the cult, Thor, and the Druids or the stars and the lineups on Halloween night, you know, I felt that was pretty interesting. But there's a director's cut too, and then there's a normal cut. So it's kind of hard to choose because the director's cut goes really into like some weird stuff that happens.
And the weird thing is there's things about the theatrical cut that are better than the producer's cut, and then there's things about the producer's cut that are better than the theatrical cut, and it's almost like the best movie is probably somewhere in between the two, I guess. But then you're 6 movies into this thing now, so you've got to do something that's a little bit different because you've just now made the same movie a couple of times in a row. So now you're doing something. I don't think that there's any more uncliche thing to take it than, the hospital that he was in, they were like druids and like he's part of a curse to kill his family so that he can get rid of his own evil. Like, it was just such a left field bizarro thing that even though it's silly, it's dumb, but I liked it.
It's all right. You know, it's not great. It's the last time you get to see Loomis. He's Tommy Doyle, and that's great. They bring back Tommy Doyle, who's telling them whatever the backtalk guy. You're on backtalk. You know, he calls in with that great phone call that he has. He's like, I saw Michael Myers. He'll be home. That whole scene's great. I mean, I just like the idea of Halloween 6. I like that it ties into 4 and 5. I like that you get a nice sort of completed story there that even ties back to earlier in the series. I mean, it does feel like it's part of this series. At least they're somewhat tied together.
Well, so that takes us now down to number 6. Number 6 movie was one I was really curious to see where it was going to land, because when it came out, I feel as if it was very acclaimed, and a lot of people loved it, but I feel as if its flavor has gone down over the years, and we're talking about Halloween Water. I mean, sorry, H2O, not 0, H2O, with 124 points. The lowest ranking it had was somebody ranked it in 10th place. The highest ranking it had was 2nd place. Somebody gave it 2nd place, which I don't agree with, but okay. Of the 4 of us, Derek, you had this ranked the lowest. You had this in 9th place. Bo, you and I both were in agreement here with 7th place. And Christy, you gave it 1 notch higher in 6th place. Obviously, we all kind of were middle of the road-ish with this, although Derek, you seemed to dislike it a little more than others.
If it wasn't for Rob Zombie's remakes, this would have been my dead last. I hate the whole concept of Halloween H2O. And I'm actually glad that it worked out in this order and we got a chance to talk about 5 and 6 before this, because that's part of the reason why I don't like it. I like 4, 5, and 6. And here comes this hotshot movie that's telling you that no, those movies are bad. They don't exist in this timeline, and we're just going to retcon this whole story. And, you know, nuts to you if you liked Halloween, because it's not good anymore and it's out. And I don't like the concept of that. It's a CG mask, for God's sake.
That CG mask, that glorious CG mask.
It wasn't my favorite thing I've ever seen, but Jamie Lee Curtis is back. Even though they were right on the nose with it, it was kind of fun that Janet Leigh was in it.
What you mean? What you thought it was a little too on the nose to have Janet Leigh go?
If I could be maternal for a moment.
I mean, it's a cool moment, and I'm sure between Jamie Lee Curtis and her, that was like a cool thing to do. I don't know, but I do have to say, I really want to know who picked that green truck that he took from the mother and daughter.
What, that doesn't seem like a truck that just like a suburban mom and her daughter would be driving around in? What?
The rest stop. Like, what? Where? I don't even understand. It's like from like the 40s or something. It's like the weirdest choice.
I don't like Derek said, I don't like the fact that they just erased every other movie, and this is supposed to be basically, I would say, right? Is that right? If this was
it doesn't completely, right? Because she's still the sister, so it's still. Yeah. So you're right. This would be 3. It doesn't do a full. It doesn't do the full retcon that H40 does. But
well, it's kind of a weird retcon because it does eliminate apparently everything after part 2, but it almost seems like it eliminates part 2 because Michael's eyes are fine, no scars on his hands, no scars anywhere. Like everything looks perfectly fine. So it seems like they're saying, there's like that seems like they're saying the fire at the ending of part 2 didn't happen. It's kind of weird.
H2O is okay in my opinion. It's not garbage and it's not great. It's just it's watchable. It has a couple Halloween vibes, and it has it was cool to see Jamie Lee back on the screen. That's something that I think all horror fans can appreciate.
There's so many moments in this movie that don't make the tiniest bit of sense. Just the fact that apparently Loomis would have a file that included where Jamie's faked death, like alternate identity is, and Michael knew where it was to go get it, and then he kills the woman and then drives a car away from her house, and the police are at the house, and none of the police go, hey, that car just pulled out of the house, maybe we should stop it. Like, it's just one dumb thing after another, and that killed the whole movie for me, because plot-wise, if you didn't have the return of Jamie Lee, this would have been like a straight-to-video, like, bottom of the barrel, but it was saved by a pretty solid cast.
It's like, the timeline didn't make sense, because Jordan Lovett, whatever his name is, when he goes into the house, it's like daytime. But then when he comes out, it's dark.
Yeah.
And then she's like, "Where are the police?"
Have you never been to Illinois? Oh, she's never been to Illinois. That's how it works in Illinois. It just goes from day to night like that. That's
No, it was just so weird. And then why wouldn't you wait for the police before going into the house? It was just so poorly written and executed. I don't know.
We're now dipping from okay into a little bit better than okay, because we're now on the top half of the list. And at number 5, it's kind of funny. The number 6 was H2O, because number 5 is a movie that I'm going to call H40. Which is the 2018 version of Halloween with 94 points. That's probably one of the bigger jumps so far, from 124 down to 94 points. The lowest score that this movie got was 9th place. The highest it got was 1st place. Somebody did rank it as their favorite. Out of the 4 of us, Bo, you were the one that gave it the lowest ranking. Derek and Christy were pretty in agreement there with 7th place, and I gave it the highest score with 6th place. I do want to put a caveat in there, though, because I ranked this movie as 6th place, and I really don't like it. I don't like this movie at all. But more so than me, Bo, you don't like this because you gave it 9th place.
Well, I'll first say that, James Judd Courtney did a great job as Michael Myers. I felt that the role that he did have to play and, fill those shoes, he did a good job doing so. The soundtrack's pretty awesome. I love the fact that John Carpenter and his kid did the soundtrack, so I will give credit where credit's due on that aspect of things. Jamie Lee Curtis was okay. She did a good job. I felt that they did a little bit of overkill with her, trying to be Rambo. I mean, it was just like a dungeon full of, torturing, aspects coming out of her house. And I was like, okay, that's a little over the top. The one thing that did it in for me, honestly, out of everything, and I know it sounds a little like, wow, that's what made you not like the movie as much. But the fact that the doctor had that switcheroo role, and it was so ridiculous to me watching that on film. And I'm thinking, like, he puts the mask on, and he just stands there in front of the car, and he's like, okay, this is what it feels like. It's like, who the hell are you, dude? Like,
very similar to what I'm saying about H2O. The plot is just stupid. Like, everything about it, and the really, really, really terrible attempts at comedy fell so flat and absurd. I will also mention one of the reason why I ranked it a little bit higher. I think I ranked it a little bit higher just for that long tracking shot, which I thought was very, very well done. It had some great creepiness to it. That shot was better than all of H2O, so that ranks it higher for me.
But I don't like Halloween H40 because it's trying to do the same thing H2O is doing. It's like, remember those movies that you kind of liked? Well, they're gone now. And we went even a step further, and whether you like the fact that Laurie is Michael's sister or not, they're gonna nix that whole storyline and go straight to being, this is it. This is the real sequel to Halloween. And no, I reject that conceit, and I reject your movie, Brian Gordon Green or whatever. Who was that? Danny McBride is involved with this. Like, I don't know. It's silly. It has a couple of fun moments. I think, like you're saying, it's a well-made film. I think they tried harder to catch the atmosphere of the original Halloween. At least H40 tries to catch a vibe. I don't know.
The Mask too, I think, came out really good for what it was worth.
One of the better masks.
One of the better masks, right? Yeah.
Out of all of them.
I would say, yeah. Outside of the original mask, Justin's mask is the best you're getting from this franchise for sure. Justin did a great job.
And Judy Greer. So.
I mean, Judy Greer does tend to lighten up quite a lot of things, even if she's criminally underused. So that'll take us up to number 4 as we get a little closer to that coveted number 1 spot. And I think we're kind of getting to the point now where this is going to be a little less surprising for people, because number 4 is also Halloween 4 with 92 points. Halloween 4 did better than I would have thought. Its lowest ranking that it got was 6th place, which it was ranked 6 times, and the highest ranking that it got was 3rd place, which was ranked 3 times. Bo, you were one of the 3 people to rank it in 3rd place, and me, Christy, and Derek all ranked it 4th place. I had Halloween 4 ranked 4th place, but I don't think it's that great of a movie. Like, it's a good Michael Myers movie, but it's really not a good like if it was up against the Friday the 13th movies, I feel like it would have been one of the lesser entries. So the fact that it's actually this high up on the list kind of says more about the quality of the later Halloween movies than the quality of itself.
It's tough, man, when it comes to that, because I really grew up watching 4. 4 was like my movie that I saw. I saw Halloween 1 as a kid. I didn't appreciate it and understand, except that there was a figure on a mask. I started watching part 4 because that's the first one I really, really understood. And then I grew up watching it, having Danielle Harris be so close to my age. It was pretty crazy to see, like I said earlier, her killing her mom at the end of that movie. The opening credits of that movie is definitely something that stuck with me and still is. I mean, I'll watch that just to get in the mood for Halloween, because it screams Halloween. I mean, it's a good movie all around, in my opinion. I think that, other than the mask, because it's pretty blank and weird, it's definitely up there for me.
I mean, I'm not crazy about Halloween 4, but in terms of the franchise and like Bo was saying, it does really feel Halloween-y. There is a great vibe that's going through Halloween 4. And honestly, with the exception of the mask, which is really bad and takes you clean out of the movie, takes me out of the movie, I think otherwise it's a fine, middle ground 80s slasher movie. It's a triumphant return that you want from Michael Myers. Like, probably not, but yeah, I mean, I like Halloween 4. Come on.
There is something that, I don't know, still is effective to me, and it's in the 4th and the 5th movie, where you realize it's just like the main crux of the film is a grown man attacking and trying to savagely murder an 8-year-old girl, which I thought is actually, like, that's pretty intense, and it actually works very well in the movie's favor. It gives it a little bit of, like, that suspenseful edge, knowing that your main victim is a very defenseless little girl. obviously there's some silly plot points. My favorite silly plot point is the fact that they're all trapped in a house at the ending, and they have a shotgun, and yet no one can figure out how to get out of this house. Like, apparently there's no windows in the house. It's just, he tries to shoot out the lock of the door, and he's like, it's metal! And then that's like it. That's their whole attempt to get out of the house. There's not a lot to dislike in this movie. I guess for me, though, there just wasn't a lot to love. So I'm very middle of the road with this one, where I enjoy it, but it's definitely not. It's not an exciting one for me.
I think, wasn't this the one that I really, really liked, Loomis?
Yes.
I think this was the one where he became my favorite part of the franchise. Some of his line readings are just so dramatic. It's just amazing.
Okay, so then that takes us into the top 3. At number 3, with 68 points, a movie that I'm so happy is apparently as loved as it deserves to be, because it got such a bad rap for a very, very long time. And we're talking about Halloween 3, Season of the Witch, which, I gotta say, for a long time, I thought people considered to be the worst Halloween movie, and I was very upset by this. But Halloween fans love Halloween 3, thankfully. Its lowest score that it got was 8th place. Somebody did rank it in 8th place. The highest that it did get number 1. And they said that they loved the idea of the anthology. They loved the story, and they thought it was one of the best endings in all of horror. Out of the 4 of us, Christy, you had it ranked the lowest out of the 4 of us in 3rd place, and the rest of us gave it 2nd place, which is where I think it deserves to be.
There you go. You got your Halloween 3 shirt on, man.
Represent.
But no, I really, really liked 3, and I'm sad that the whole anthology idea didn't take off.
Who was your favorite part about part 3?
I don't remember. I'm sorry. I'm so hot.
Christy, Tom Atkins, first of all, if you're not familiar with the man, he is a hero. He is a legend. He is fantastic. If you don't love him from this, you love him from The Fog. If you don't love him from The Fog, you love him from Night of the Creeps. And if you don't love him from any of those movies, then you're dead inside. Because he's a lovable guy, and apparently Christy has met him.
Nice.
She didn't know who he was.
I was like, I think I have a picture with that dude.
Is this that guy?
I met
Chalice, yes.
Is this legend?
Well, it was like 15 years ago, too. I can't remember everybody that asked to take a picture with me, okay?
Hey.
Honestly, there's a part of me that wishes that this was the direction that the series went. That every year or 2 years or 3 years or whatever like that, you got a different Halloween movie, and the story was completely different, and the only general theme that linked them were that they all were kind of around Halloween or about Halloween-ish kind of things. This movie is a great example of that, because once again, much like the first movie, the focus of the holiday of Halloween is integral to the plot.
I would say it's more integral to the plot than the original Halloween is to the plot. You know what I mean? Oh, dude, it's witches trying to mass sacrifice children on Samhain. Like, it's so Halloween. It's off the charts.
Dude, I have it tattooed on my head. I don't know.
There it is.
Oh, wow, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, that's super cool.
That's why I love Halloween 3. I mean, as a kid, I never really understood it, because it was basically half the movie of Dr. Chalice trying to, bang the dude's daughter, but
rightfully so.
Yeah, rightfully so. I mean, but it's one of those things. Once I got it as an adult and I watched it, and I figured, this is one of the best all-around holiday Halloween vibe movies there ever was.
And I will also say that, obviously not, I guess, the iconic villain that Michael Myers is, but Connell Cochran is a great villain. That dude nailed it.
Happy Halloween.
And yes, that ending will always be one of the best endings. It's so well acted and edited, and the music building. It's just there's no way you could watch that and not be excited.
I mean, I love the original score. I love Carpenter's original score for the original Halloween, but his work with Alan Howarth on Halloween 3 is honestly, it's one of my favorite horror soundtracks of all time. I love this soundtrack. It's perfectly suited to this movie. It's perfectly suited to its time. It's perfectly suited to Halloween. I love listening to. I will just put that shit on. I love that.
Me too, Derek. Man, I actually, when I'm sitting here during the day doing my job, I randomly, frequently, I should say, throw on Halloween 3 soundtrack and just listen to the Chariots of Pumpkin thing.
Oh man, so good.
We're now getting right up to that golden bit there. I don't think this is going to come as a shock then that number 2 is number 2, Halloween 2, the original Halloween 2, with 63 points, only 5 points lower than Halloween 3. Its lowest score was a 7, and its highest score was number 1. Somebody ranked Halloween number 1. Halloween 2 number 1. I was kind of surprised by that. I didn't think this was anybody's favorite Halloween movie. Out of the 4 of us, Bo, you had this ranked the lowest, but 4th place, which is not that low. Me and Derek had it ranked as 3rd place, and Christy, you had it ranked the highest out of the 4 of us with 2nd place.
I have a really hard time separating it from the first. I feel like it's the first and the second are just the same movie. So if I could have ranked them both number 1, I would have, because it's just a continuation. This, I think, out of all the the big 3 franchises like Halloween, Jason, and Freddy, this is the one I knew least about. It's been my favorite so far, which, I was surprised. I just think that there's more substance to the story of Michael Myers, and I think he's creepier and scarier. And as far as 2, I feel like that's when Loomis really becomes his character, which I just, like I said before with the 4th one, I love his character.
Loomis is definitely completely off the deep end in the second one. He's like shooting at windows.
They shot him!
I don't know what death is!
Wait. I
shot him 6 times!
I was curious. How many times did Loomis shoot him? Like, how many? Does anybody know?
I shot him 6 times! I shot him 6 times! I shot him 6 times!
Like, do they ever say in the movie how many times Loomis shoots Michael Myers? I'm curious. I wonder how many times he shoots him.
I'm sort of with Christy though. I mean, in terms of series, this is the best 1-2 punch you're getting from your big hitters. I mean, I think 2 it's a lesser Halloween. Almost feels like Halloween if it had been directed by not John Carpenter in less talented hands, where it kind of goes awry in some places. But I mean, it's close, man, and it feels. I think that's the big thing. It feels. The mask, it's the same mask, and it's it looks a little different, but it looks good enough. The score, like I was saying, from Alan Howarth is good. I like what he does with it. It looks right. It feels right. Doesn't have quite the same effect as the original, but I don't know, man. I like Halloween 2. I think it gets a short shrift.
I mean, the continuation of it, is pretty cool. I always enjoyed that scene where the girl's in her house and she's like, I can hear the sirens, it's right down the street, and that's kind of really scary and spooky, thinking about, an insane mental patient escape. And then, her friend's calling her on the phone and telling her, hey, did you hear what happened? She's like, oh, yeah, I hear him right down the street. Something about that always got me. But I don't know. I think the slow part of the hospital scenes got a little draggy-ish. I mean, they were pretty slow at times. But, I mean, I definitely think Halloween 2 is an iconic film. I mean, it stands right up there with Part 1, in my opinion, just a little bit under.
Yeah, it's kind of weird because I don't know that. I mean, obviously doing this channel, I've watched a lot of franchises and a lot of sequels, and I will say that the whole idea of this takes place immediately after the last one is pretty rare. Yeah. And it really works in this movie's favor. It doesn't feel so much like you're watching a sequel. It feels like you're just watching the second half of the first movie. Right. And that does a lot for it. There was more.
Am I the only one that thinks it's funny as hell when the dude slips on the blood and hits his head? hospital. I mean, I don't know why. Ever since I was like a younger teenager, I thought that scene was just funny as hell, man. I mean, just the way you hear his shoes slip and everything, he's out cold, and I don't know, he just takes a big old bump, boom, and he's just done, you know.
And he's kind of built up as being like the male lead of the movie, and he never even meets Michael Myers. Never even comes near him.
Yeah, I didn't even think of that. He never even meets him.
No, he slips and falls, bumps his head, I guess staggers out to a car, possibly dies. But if he dies, it had nothing to do with Michael. It was just the guy's sheer idiocy of falling down and cracking his own head open. It's hilarious.
But Loomis definitely became, I would say, more of the crazier role, starting to become the iconic Loomis character that he was. One showed that he was a concerned doctor. He was serious, but part two, he's like, I'm gonna start flashing my gun everywhere, and I'm gonna start, going after this mother, MFer, and it's just funny how to see him progress, and
he flashes that gun at every chance he can get.
And let's not mince words, he's totally responsible for Ben Tramer's death.
100%.
like poor Ben Tramer, he's just out trying to trick or treat. He has the unfortunate choice of masks that he picks, the same one that Michael had picked, and then just gets plowed by that cop car. Man, it's like, I mean, at least you didn't think that scene was funny.
Like you're trying to put mustard on your sandwich and you get distracted by watching, the TV news at 9, and then you realize that Michael Myers in your house. He took your best butcher knife.
Nah, man, whatever happened to that sandwich?
So that brings us to number 1. I don't think this will surprise anybody that the number 1 movie is the original 1978 Halloween at a mere 29 points. The lowest possible score to get from this ranking would have been 20 points, and this one only got 29. The lowest ranking that it got, get ready for this, someone ranked it 8th place. They said that it felt dated and dull. Although it was ranked number 1, I want to keep in mind, 20 people voted this time around. 17 people ranked it number 1. So clearly a much beloved movie. On our panel here, the 4 people that you were looking at up on your screen all ranked it number 1 because we're no dummies. We know good, awesome Halloween movies when we see them. And this is one of the best horror movies ever made.
And which is crazy if you think about it, there's not a lot of blood, there's not a lot of gore. It's just the thrill, it's the lighting, it's the music, it's the overall great white shark, man, coming at you, and you never know when he's going to be appearing next. And the whole concept of, like, Chrissy said, like this little kid just within 15 minutes of a movie is killing his sister for no apparent reason, and it never gets explained why. It's just
and I mean, in such a twisted way, getting it on. I don't know. It's just it's really uncomfortable. And I do have to say, with doing these lists, especially with the big franchises, I aren't things that I've been really familiar with, but a kind of, I guess, consequence of doing these is I've gotten to know these directors a little bit better. And I never really knew John Carpenter as a direct, I don't know, I'm not a horror person, but
which is why we have you on the show. We want the opinion of the non-horror fanatic. I'm actually more interested in your opinion as somebody that is not a lover of John Carpenter than someone that is.
Yeah, but I mean, it has given me a really big, I've been getting to know these different directors, and John Carpenter really stands out. And I don't know, this is one of those near perfect horror movies, I feel like.
I, on the other hand, do know John Carpenter quite well. He's probably one of my favorites, to the point that I want to do in the future, we'll be doing a John Carpenter themed Dead Last. And I'm really curious to see where this will rank on that list, because John Carpenter's got a few movies that I could see very easily being the top. But that being said, this is just, the fact that this was also one of his earlier movies and was on such a low budget and is so well done. And there's so many really subtle, disquieting things. You guys were talking about him killing his sister. And one of the things that always stands out to me about that is the fact that he stops and looks up at the knife because it's all from his point of view, and you just see he's just watching the knife go down. He's not even looking to see where his sister is. He's just watching his hand with the knife. And for some reason, just that little, it's such a small thing, but I think it actually says a lot about that character bit, and it just makes it creepier to me. Plus, in sharp contrast to H2O, there's very few jump scares in this movie. Every scare in this movie is earned. Like, most of it is Michael just lurking in the background, just kind of out of sight, and you just see him back there, and it's unsettling. And I think there's one or two jump out, and like I know when he jumps out behind Annie in the cars, and that's like a bit of a jump scare. But it's an earned jump scare. It's not a cheap jump scare.
It is a movie where every aspect of the movie is just firing on all cylinders. It looks great. It sounds great. It's paced great. The atmosphere is great. Even the acting, which for a low-budget horror movie is solid all around. You got Donald Pleasance is doing a great job. Jamie Lee Curtis is doing a great job. And this thing sets the table for so many movies that come after it. It basically invents an entire genre. People are ripping this movie off for years and years to come. They're still doing it. And it's because this movie is so good.
Well, I want to wrap up this conversation by going to the man that I'm going to go ahead and consider, just from his surroundings, to be the most Halloweenist diehard of us here. I want to know what Bo has to say about this movie.
But no, I mean, you got an up-and-coming director, John Carpenter, who took this movie on such a low budget and turned it into one of the most respected franchises of all time now in the horror industry. It's just one of my favorite. I mean, it's my favorite horror movie of all time. I mean, someone says, "Hey, what's your favorite horror movie?" right off the bat, and it's crazy to see such a big boom of Halloween in the last 15 years. I mean, it's grown so much. Going to all the conventions, seeing every, I mean, there's actually Halloween conventions, Halloween 35, Halloween 40. I attended both of them, and to see so many people, so many different age groups attending that was pretty phenomenal to see, because it's such a small little film that had such a big impact on what we appreciate and consider horror.
Well, okay, so there you have it. That is 11 movies that we've now ranked from dead last up to first. Let's go over these rankings really quickly here. In dead last, with 195 points, was Halloween Resurrection. 10th place was the Rob Zombie's Halloween 2 with 191 points. In 9th place with 169 points was Rob Zombie's Halloween. In 8th place with 153 points, Halloween 5, was that The Revenge of Michael Myers. In 7th place, Halloween 6, The Curse of Michael Myers, I guess otherwise known as just Halloween, The Curse of Michael Myers, with 142 points. Number 6 is H2O with 124 points. Number 5 is just the 2018 Halloween, which we've dubbed H4O at 94 points. Number 4, Halloween 4, 92 points. Number 3, Halloween 3. You're seeing a theme here at 68 points. Number 2 with 63 points is Halloween 2. And finally, the granddaddy of them all with a mere 29 points. A well-earned number 1 spot for the original Halloween. I like that list. I mean, there's a couple of things that I personally would have switched around, but the rankings have said otherwise. I feel like these are pretty good numbers. I'm not mad about where any of these movies have fallen. If you, watching this, are mad about some of these numbers, you can let us know. And you will let us know in the comments below. Tell us where you would rank them. And just know that if you want to help us rank these, you can by going to patreon.com/movietimelines. As a patron, you will be invited to participate, and you can let your voice be heard. So go there. These guys over on the side here are patrons right now. These are all patrons, so these guys can vote. And these guys down below here are people that did send me their list. I want to thank all of you guys for participating and sending me in your rankings. It is a really fun thing that we're able to do, and to kind of have this sort of fun experience and rank these up. And I also very much want to thank my panel here. Thank you, Derek. Thank you, Christy. And thank you, Bo, your first time on the show. Hopefully not your last. Hopefully we'll see
Definitely not. I appreciate you guys for having me, and it's been a really amazing, fun time, and I hope everyone continues to support Dead Last.
Yes, and of course, also, please check out Christy at her website, christymel.com. Check out Hops and Horror on Instagram. Go watch those today. Go check out HalloweenShindig.com and listen to some awesome Halloween tunes. And also Shindig Radio on now Spotify and iTunes.
Yeah, no. Indeed.
Make sure you do all of that. Like, subscribe, share this video, and then we'll see you in a little while for more Dead Last. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Take care.
Happy Halloween.
So you're gonna watch the new Halloween movie. You want to know the continuity and the timeline, but you only have a few minutes. I got you covered.
Okay, so the first Halloween came out in 1978. It starts out with a title card saying that it's Halloween of 63, as young Mikey kills a sis. Bounce ahead 15 years to 1978, and he escapes and goes home. The whole movie takes place over the course of the day of October 31st and ends with a killer on the run. The second movie came out 3 years later in 81 and gives us another card with the same date of October 31st, 1978, and picks up right where the first movie left off. It continues the story and takes place the same night, leading into the morning of November 1st, and reveals that Jamie is Michael's sister, and ends with Michael and Loomis seemingly dead. The third movie arrived 1 year later in 1982 with Halloween 3 Season of the Witch and was unconnected to the other two films, going so far as to show that the first film was a movie in this universe, although no year is shown. In the movie, it does show days and dates that line up with the year 1982, presumably when this one occurs. It took 6 years for another entry, and in 1988 we saw Halloween 4 Return of Michael Myers, taking us back into the universe of the first two films. Michael and Loomis are alive, and in the early part of the film we're told that Michael has been comatose for 10 years, so this is 1988, and in real time. He wakes up to come after his niece, Laurie's daughter, although Laurie herself has died off screen. 1 year later, in 1989, the series continued with Halloween 5, The Revenge of Michael Myers. It's essentially a repeat of what went on in the last one with Michael again after young Jamie, and we're told that 1 year has passed, so it's 1989 here as well. There was a 6-year gap until we saw Halloween, The Curse of Michael Myers in 1995, and there's a narration at the beginning that tells us that Michael and Jamie have been missing for 6 years, keeping the series on the same schedule as the years of release, and it's 95 in universe as well. The series changes here as we go to 1998 with Halloween H2O, or Halloween 20 years later, and right off the bat a police officer says that the original killings were 20 years ago, so it's not just the title. This film deleted everything after parts 1 and 2 though, making this timeline parts 1, 2, and H2O, and 3 through 6 were a separate universe. 4 years later, Halloween Resurrection came out in 2002, and a nurse in the opening informs us that it's actually 3 years since the last movie, so we're out of real time, and in 2001. The series shifts again when 2007's Rob Zombie's Halloween remake arrived, once again resetting the timeline, this one completely. It starts with young Michael in what looks like the 70s, but jumps 16 years and everything is current, so it looks like it's 07 in the past section actually is 1991, or the 91 of Zombie's Mind, which is 1978 or something. His sequel, Halloween 2, came out 2 years later in 2009, but actually takes place only 1 year later, so it's set in 2008. The timeline then makes less sense, of course, because in 2018 you've got the simply titled Halloween, but we like to call it H4O, and it resets everything again, making a new timeline that only keeps the first movie. And they say that it's 40 years later, so it's set in 18 as well, with Laurie returning. Now, in 2020, I guess 2021, Halloween Kills comes out. It looks like it follows the Halloween 2 concept of taking place immediately afterwards, so it will presumably also take place in 2018. So we have 4 timelines. Original timeline starting in 1978, jumps to 1988 and 89, and then again to 1995. Timeline 2, which starts in 1978 and then goes straight to 98 with nothing in between, and then moves ahead to 2001.
We also have Timeline 3, which we don't like to talk about, and starting in 2007 and then goes to 2008. Finally, there's Timeline 4, which again starts in 1978 but then skips immediately to 2018. Oh, but then there's also the outlier Timeline 5, which has no Michael Myers and is just 1982.
Hey, it's Halloween, almost. So I figured what better way to celebrate than by taking a look at John Carpenter's classic film, Halloween. Didn't I already do that? You're right. And as you know, when I can't talk about an original film, I want to take a look at its clones and knockoffs and everything ripped off Halloween, even though it itself is kind of a rip-off of Black Christmas. But let's be clear here. I'm not going for somewhat rip-offs like Friday the 13th kind of was, because that they said they wanted to make Halloween at a summer camp. No, as you'll soon see, we're going to get a lot more specific than that.
Number 10. So, Night of the Clown starts off with an Elvira kind of host who actually sets us up with something more like a Nightmare on Elm Street ripoff, as a man in a clown suit who had killed kids is burned alive by their parents. He sort of looks like Leatherface though, so maybe this is a Chainsaw ripoff. I mean, here's the box art. So if anything, they're marketing it more as a Halloween and wait a minute.
Why didn't you tell me this was a Ferguson movie? Just one list. One. No Ferg, no Polonia. Just one list. I'm begging you.
So this movie is actually a remake of a 1998 Todd Cook film with the same name. And oh look, a couple of schoolgirls walking home from school in a Halloween-decorated suburban neighborhood. It's just like Halloween, except shot by a man hand-holding the camera while walking backwards with no sound equipment and a sound effect track of birds chirping that never changes in volume as they walk.
So, what are you going to be tonight? Something sexy for sure. Yeah, I was thinking something like that too. Maybe Marilyn Monroe or Jean Mansfield after the accident. That's kind of morbid. Whatever, you know guys are totally into that sort of thing.
Sean Phillips is in this one, of course, in a scene that I'm extremely confident that he shot by himself and is holding the camera in his left hand here. They copy the whole dude standing outside the window, look away, not there anymore, but Ferguson has one trick that Carpenter didn't know about, and that's shots of people walking around and shopping for extended periods of time.
I remember an interview with John saying that his biggest regret was not having a 5-minute sequence of Laurie and her friends just kind of browsing.
They straight up do the whole Halloween 3 shot, and for some reason, a half hour in, they actually just show an entire actual Halloween safety video. There's no joke to it, they just show it from start to finish. I'm not joking. The whole movie is around an hour long, and this safety video is almost 15 minutes of it.
Carpenter's like really kicking himself for not thinking of that one.
Back in the movie, a bunch of people have a Halloween party in the old house where the clown guy was killed, and they dance for a while. It's really 2.5 minutes straight of just footage of the whitest whititude possible. The clown shows up and starts killing people, and just super abruptly one guy finds his remains and buries them, and it's over, and it's just garbage, but at least it's short. Number 9.
Next is 1991's Haunted Ween, which kind of gives itself away with the title, and it's the only film by Doug Robertson, who wrote, directed, and produced, and actually passed away in mid-2020. So we have our prerequisite opening scene in which a mostly silent young man, Eddie here, who scares a little girl in a haunted house, and she backs into this, I'm assuming non-OSHA approved spike that's just like in the middle of the room for some reason, and then hacks her with a machete. Cut to 20 years later, and his mother dies, so he goes home on Halloween, or I guess Haunted Ween. Well, there's a frat house there having trouble paying their dues, and this film takes place in that really weird era in which the 90s hadn't quite kicked in yet, but it's starting to leak through, and yet still hasn't figured out that the 80s were over, and the movie spends just way too much time with these people.
Raise some hell, fellas!
They find the old haunted house and get invited by Eddie to have a fundraiser party there, and it takes all the way until just under the 1 hour mark for things to kick off as our boy shows up in a Halloween mask, picking people up and pinning them to things with a big knife. They have their own haunted house, and this one's not terribly rip-off-ish, but it is called Haunted Ween, has a kid commit a murder, go away for a decade or more, and return to his hometown to kill people in a basic Halloween mask, so it fits. Once it gets going, it's pretty fun, and even the middle stuff is oddly entertaining, but it's really not great, but it is enjoyable.
Man, it looks so real.
No duh, kid. It is a woman tied to a chair. What would not be real about that?
She is good. It looks so real.
Then there's this guy who I think is supposed to be doing a Pee Wee Herman impression.
Mel, you and Mel got something going? Not with you around, dickhead. Get out of here. Well, okay, but you owe me a good story later.
Or is that just how he is? And side note, maybe this goes into spoiler territory, but whatever. Did you know that a single shotgun blast to the back of a van completely blows it up into nothing? Number 8. And here we are with 1981's Final Exam, directed by Jimmy Houston, who's also directed My Best Friend is a Vampire. The opening scene gives us a couple at Lover's Lane, killed off by an unmasked man randomly, and we're at a college, and surprisingly the kids actually look like college kids. It's right before finals, and there's fun lighthearted pranks like pretending to drive up and shoot a bunch of people with fake machine guns. Oh, that's rich, shooting people on a school campus.
That used to be a joke.
After the initial murder scene, there's about a solid half hour until we even see the killer again, and he's lurking outside windows but disappears, of course. His next killing actually doesn't happen until just short of the 1 hour mark in the movie, with lots of college shenanigans filling in the gap in between. When he does appear, he's a silent, motiveless killer seemingly attacking at random, and in terms of overall plot, this one isn't super close to the source material, but the ambiance is. It feels like Halloween. It kinda looks like it, features a similar killer and POV shots, and there's also this character named Radish, and supposedly he was the inspiration for Randy from Scream. Number 7. From 1981, there's The Odd Case of Absurd, which is sort of a loose sequel to the movie Anthropophagus, but it's kind of its own thing, and when I say its own thing, I mean Halloween. Directed by Joe D'Amato, who I've already featured several times in various lists, and it has George Eastman here, who also wrote the script of a guy on the run, chased by a priest. Thankfully, this guy isn't drunk.
I'm not drunk!
And the patient is able to heal up remarkably quick, and he's fully restored and goes on a killing spree.
So here's where the Halloween comparisons come into play. So this guy, Mikos, was locked away and experimented on and became insane and superhuman. He then escaped, and it's up to this priest to track him down and put an end to the terror he had locked away for so long. There's a spectacular bandsaw death, and that weird mask guy from Demons shows up, and fun fact, that's freaking Michel Sauvé, director of one of my all-time favorites, Della Morte dell'Amore. No surprises here, but the killer is focused on attacking this teenage girl who's babysitting a little boy who's more interested in watching horror movies than anything else, and they refer to the killer as the Boogeyman, although the biggest difference between this one and Carpenter's is that Halloween doesn't just drag in the middle 30 minutes. And did they just steal this kid from the audition line for the Annie movie? There is an original wrinkle in that the kid has an older sister who's bedridden, and it's not exactly a carbon copy, but it definitely takes a ton of inspiration, like the whole blinded killer in a room with the final girl, and it's a good watch, except for the slow spot in the middle. Number 6. Fast forward all the way to 1992 now for Happy Hell Night, also known as Frat Night, and we're told about an inmate at an asylum who's been locked up for 25 years and described as being not human and waiting for something. Flashing back to 25 years ago, and Guy, with no last name, is here, and Father Malleus has killed 7 students, so we've got a murder in the past on Halloween, and the killer locked up for over a decade, so it's looking familiar. Back in 1991, it's Pledge Week, and young Eric here is the son of Kolchak, and it's Halloween, of course, and some pledges have to break into the asylum to take a picture of Malleus as an initiation, who then escapes. Malleus is blonde and pale with dark eyes and almost looks like Michael Myers' mask on his own, and there is a Loomis-like character and a priest who's obsessed with stopping the killer because he believes him to be the ultimate incarnation of evil. But, this...
That's completely original.
There's also an early role for CSI star Georgia Fox, and then the killer returns to the scene of his original crimes in the night of Halloween to kill again. This one is sort of the opposite of some of the other movies on this list, and it swipes the entire basic structure, but then switches up the style and themes enough that it does have its own stuff going on. Except when it doesn't, like when Malleus gets knocked out a window, is presumed dead on the ground below, only to disappear a few minutes later. It does sort of get supernatural near the end, so it does have that distinction though, and it's an okay watch. Not great by any means, but certainly not terrible. Number 5. Alright, how about 1989's Offerings? It sure starts off sounding like a ripoff with this opening theme. This one has little John here, who has an abusive mother and lousy home life, and he tortures his animals, and, Did
Rob Zombie watch this?
So instead of killing someone, he's injured in a prank and ends up in a mental home for 10 years, but wakes up and I guess goes nuts, and then starts killing people. It hits all the beats, he calls people without saying anything, feeds on animals, and oh, come on with this music. And he starts stalking the kids that are responsible for his accident. John continues his revenge streak, constantly accompanied by that familiar music, sending parts of his victims to the one girl who was nice to him as a kid. Once past the overall setup of the film, it kind of becomes its own thing. John never dons a mask. It's not on Halloween or any holiday for that matter. There's no psychiatrist character on the hunt. But
if that initial structure doesn't push it into rip-off territory, the music absolutely does. Number 4. Jumping ahead to 2007, we have Frayed, and it starts in a pretty familiar fashion, with it starting out in 1994 as young Kurt kills his mother and he's institutionalized. It then jumps ahead to him being an adult and, of course, escaping. He's wearing some sort of clown makeup or mask or some such, and there's a security guard from the asylum who ends up caught up in everything. And there's a twist with him that it's pretty obvious what the twist with him is. Then Kurt has a sister, of course, and she and her friends go out to the woods and eventually end up in the sights of the murderous brother. And sadly, this one could have been alright if it didn't run almost 2 damn hours long. Seriously, there's a solid 20 to 30 minutes of this movie that just could have been clipped right down to make this a lean little thriller, but instead, it just drags and spins its wheels for the majority of Act 2. And part of the problem is that if you figure out the twist, which is really easy to do, pretty much all the drama is drained from the rest of the film. By the time that it gets to the ending, it sort of loses its Halloween vibes, but you still realize you're watching a movie about a young boy that murders a family member for no reason, gets put away, escapes more than a decade later, and goes back to his hometown to hunt down his sister. That being said, the last couple of minutes does throw in one last twist at you that is actually very unexpected, but kinda poorly handled, and isn't quite worth the amount of time it takes to get there. Number 3. Okay, let's go back to 1999 for Lover's Lane, which begins 13 years ago in that classic urban legend of the hook hand attacking young lovers in a car. Sheriff Anderson's wife is killed, and they catch the killer, who was a patient of Les Nessman. It then jumps to the present day, and little Mandy is now grown up and in high school, and one of the cheerleaders is a young Cindy Campbell in her first film role. Ray, the killer, is in an institution, although I should point out that we didn't see him do the killings, and he claims to have not done them, and he escapes. Although this doesn't take place on Halloween, it is on Valentine's Day, and predictably, a masked killer in a jumpsuit goes back home to start the killing. Everyone ends up at Lover's Lane, of course, and the attacks commence. It turns out, to no surprise, the hook is specifically after Mandy now, and pretty soon all the kids have been killed off. And look, I'm not positive because of the way that it's shot, but I'm pretty sure that when he hooks them, he gets them in the bathing suit zone, which I guess is
different.
It's alright, maybe a little bit slow in the middle part, and it's one of the cloniest clones that you're gonna get. Like, it's pretty much just Halloween in February, although it does throw some twists around at the end, some of which were obvious, but at least one that was pretty unexpected. All in all, a decent time killer. Number 2. One of the earliest Halloween ripoffs is probably the most notorious, and it's 1980's He Knows You're Alone, which starts with a young woman being killed in a movie theater, and Principal Vernon is here, and our killer targets women who are about to get married. So there's our differences to Carpenter, but then the similarities start. We see Ray kill a woman in front of a mirror through his POV, and then a young Steve James is here for a cameo, and also James Rebhorn, and Amy thinks that she sees someone stalking her, but maybe she doesn't. She's getting married, but her ex wants her back, and Ray starts killing Amy's friends, including a couple that went off to have sex, and the girl's wearing a men's button-down, and the guy walks around the dark house shirtless to familiar-sounding music. Plus, did I mention that there's a cop that has a previous history with the killer who is obsessively tracking him down, acting erratically? Her ex's name is Marvin, and I guess when you have a character named Marvin, you have to say his name as much as possible.
Marvin. Marvin. Dumb Marvin. Oh, Marvin. Marvin. Marvin?
Opened about a week.
Marvin!
Want to hear about the
Marvin?
effect?
Oh, Marvin. I'm scared, Marvin.
Hello, Marvin.
Hey, Marvin.
Don't think that's a thing? Check out the Amityville Curse.
Marvin. Turn, Marvin. Marvin.
Marvin.
Marvin?
Marvin. Marvin?
Yeah, Marvin. It's your wife, Marvin.
Marvin.
What is it, Marvin?
What? Then, the reason this film is still talked about today shows up, and it's a baby Tom Hanks. If you've watched this one based on them selling the movie as having him in it, you'll be shocked to know that he doesn't show up until an hour in, and is in about 3 minutes total. And then after her friends are all killed off, there's a final showdown between Amy and Ray, and the cops show up just in time. All in all, there's enough original here that it's not a direct ripoff, and the structure is different, but there's clearly so many stylistic elements and thematic notes that put it on this list. Number 1. Finally, next up is 1981's Nightmare, also known as Nightmares in a Damaged Brain. That starts off with a fantastic effect. So we have George here, who's under psychiatric care ever since he was a child, and still plagued by memories of his parents' death. When he was younger, he killed a family and has been locked up since, and is now released, which is a variation from the Halloween formula, and that his psychiatrist doesn't want to keep him locked up. After a surprisingly explicit visit to a peep show, George has a lapse and heads down to Florida and starts killing and stalking his ex-wife, who's now dating discount Tommy Chong. So to clarify, a man who killed family members as a child and was locked away gets out and starts coming after family members. By the time that it gets to the end, we have a movie in which a killer has donned a Halloween mask to stalk those family members that are watched over by a babysitter while his psychiatrist is trying to track him down. So yeah.
Halloween knockoff.
One of the more interesting parts of this video is that Tom Savini is listed as doing the special effects, although he denies actually having anything to do with the movie. Director Romano Scavolini swears that Savini was there on set and oversaw the effect sequences, and actors and photographs corroborate this. Eventually, Savini stated that he did no effects and his role was actually more of a consultant giving advice about how things looked, and he did threaten to sue over them using his name for promotional purposes.
So there you have it, 10 movies that rip off Halloween in one way or another. Some just from a basic thematic way, and other ones in a straight up storyline, the story structure way. But yeah, there's a big mix of things in here. But I'd say for the most part, I actually enjoyed quite a bit of these. The majority of these I enjoyed watching. They were fun. Let me know if you've seen these down below and what you think of some of them and what other Halloween knockoffs you can think of. Put them right below in the comments. I want to hear it. Also, let me know what you thought about this video. Hit the like button. Subscribe to the channel, of course. Share this video out to your friends. Put it on Reddit or something like that, whatever. And also check out the Patreon page at patreon.com/movietimelines. These guys over here support the channel, and you can too by going there and, you know, kicking a little bit of funds over to the channel, help keep it going. But in the meantime, you can also just keep on watching the videos, which I also appreciate. And I will see you very shortly for another great one, and happy Halloween, everybody. Looks like we're breaking down Halloween Kills, and I'm gonna go scene by scene to break down what I didn't like about it, but also point out what I do like. But I want to start this all off by saying that this is just my opinion. It's how I feel about a movie. If you feel differently, I totally respect that. Don't let me saying that I hated this movie make you feel like you need to defend it or anything. We don't have to like the same things. I'm totally okay with that. But at the same time, please give the same respect back. I don't think that you're a worse person for liking a movie, and I would hope that you would think the same thing about me. Now let's get to it. So you have this whole 12-minute sequence at the beginning with a flashback to 1978. It's a good mood starter and all, and some fine nostalgia nods. And if you're gonna throw Jim Cummings in there, then you're gonna get a point. But hot damn, is this unnecessary? It's just for the sake of the nostalgia. And while it does have a tiny speck of character stuff for Hawkins, it's nothing that isn't conveyed in his flashback scene that's shown later in the movie. Keep that scene in and cut this scene off, and the same contributions to the overall story is intact. Carpenter doing the score is a win. There's no way to watch something with his music behind it and not get that good feeling. So that's a big plus. And then we're next introduced to our side characters. They're all survivors of the first film, and they're at a bar, and they're gonna stay at that bar until the 50-minute mark of the movie. What are they doing there? They're talking about Michael Myers and what a big impact that he had on all of them, except the last movie bent over backwards to tell us that that one night was no big deal, that Michael's rampage was just a blip in the town's history, and everyone, and I mean everyone, treated Laurie like she was insane for not being over it. That was literally earlier this evening, but now there's like whole groups of people meeting together to discuss it. You just gave us an entire movie telling us that Laurie was alone in all of this and had mental issues because no one believed her, but now Tommy is raising toasts to her? Then you've got this firefighter battle scene, and that's fine. It plays out like any martial arts battle where everyone is nice enough to storm in one by one. It's fine. And then you've got this nice little mayhem scene with the elderly couple that I like quite a bit. It does a good job of humanizing them before the violence. This seems to be Green's best skill because there's a few of these over this one and the last one, and I do like that. The deaths are fine, but what's Michael's motivation here? I've seen people just say that Michael is Jason now, and it's a fair comparison. In the first movie, he had a specific reason for stalking who he did. He was after Jamie because he reminded her of his sister. Is he just killing to kill now at random? That's fine and all, but that's just not interesting to me. Love it or hate it, having Laurie be his sister gave Michael a reason for being and not just being a senseless slasher like all of the others. It gave him a reason, and I liked that. It was nice. Then, okay. Then you have this subplot that makes me insane. There's apparently two guys that live in the Myers house now, and they're aware that it's the Myers house. Everyone is aware that it's the Myers house. So, to spell that out, people who live in the house of a mass murderer, the same house that the same murderer returned to after killing people 40 years ago, aren't concerned that he might do so again. Why are there no police outside? Why are they even staying there? It's all over the news that Myers is loose, so why would they remain in the house? Or at least be concerned that he's out there. When he kills the one guy, he says, "Michael, you came home." Well, of course he did! That's exactly what he did last time. It doesn't take a psychologist to figure out that he might repeat that pattern. Even if he didn't, who the hell would take that chance? Then there's this whole playground scene in which everyone makes really dumb choices and multiple characters have guns, and yet no one can quite figure out how to shoot Myers, but it's honestly no more obnoxious than most killer attack scenes, so I'm not going to be too ticked about it. It's a fine scene of violence, even if it's dumb. By this point, we're close to an hour in. We're halfway through the movie. What happened? Nothing. Michael is still alive, loose in the town. Characters are finding out he's still alive and reacting to it. That's it. 50 minutes of that. We're really only with the characters for a minute or two, and no one has any clear character issues or development. Hell, Laurie's comatose for most of it. There's a nice moment between her and Hawkins that's a good bit. I wish they had played up their relationship a little bit more in the first movie to set this up, but whatever. Then there's just this inordinate amount of time in which every character is at the hospital. The whole town is just here for some reason, including, I guess, the entire police force. At no point in this movie is there scenes of police officers out on the town searching for Michael. They're just camped out at the hospital. I think the implication was that it's a small town police department, but they sure had a maxed out fire squad who has a whole team of firemen equipped with giant buzzsaws and everything, but then has this tiny police force. It's also been hours and hours into this night of attacks, including a prison transport that overturned. This is a big incident. Assistance from nearby counties could be in effect, so where's any of that? There's also this whole plot line about the mob mistaking another inmate for Michael Myers somehow and chasing him until he kills himself. This whole scenario starts in the weirdest way possible, with a short, fat, balding man with a huge cut on his head standing outside of a window yelling, "Help me." For some reason, then every person around just says, "Oh hey, that's Michael Myers." Keep in mind, they've been running news stories about the escaped prisoners all night. And Michael is now supposed to be this huge stain on the town's history, and yet no one knows what he looks like. I would have understood if they thought it was Michael, started freaking out, and then they just looked at the guy and were like, LOL, that's clearly not him, and then went about their business. If that scene were there, it'd make sense. This whole plot line would still be as pointless, but at least it would make sense. There's one great nugget amidst all of that, though, even if it's just a tiny one. Oscar, one of the kids killed in the last film, has a mom who's desperately looking for him because he never came back from the party. In the middle of the chaos, she seeks his dead body in the morgue, and she sees it, and we see her anguish. It's a great moment because in horror movies we get so wrapped up in the kills and the victims, and this type of aftermath is never really seen. Oscar was just a teenager with a mom who loved him and worried about him, and now he's on a slab, and her trauma is all over the screen. It's a great scene, and it's one that I wish that they explored more instead of focusing on chasing a fat dude out of a window. By this point, we're an hour and 12 minutes into the movie, and still there's absolutely no central plot except Michael's out there killing, and we're all organizing to find him. That's it. There's been nothing else. Next, in what I think might be the dumbest section of the film, Lonnie, get your ass away from there, figures out that Michael is going back to his old house, and he's the only one to think of this for some reason, even though, again, it's literally what he did the last time. The mob is behind him. The police are there. People with guns and bats surround him. So what does he do? Load up a car with his teenage son and his girlfriend and goes there themselves. No reason is given as to why he does this alone, and doesn't tell anyone else. Just does. After Michael is obviously at his old house and obviously kills Lonnie and his son, because what did they think was going to happen, Karen shows up to make Michael chase her. They do the fake out thing with her again, which is a nice moment. I like that. I was half expecting it because it's what they did in the last one, but it worked. And the town just lays out Michael. There's like 80 people there and they shoot him and all that. Again, the police are nowhere to be found. A whole group of people just up and left the hospital, and none of them said, hey, maybe we should follow them and see what's up. Are the police just all still hanging out at the hospital? And then, in the middle of all of this, for some reason, Karen just decides to wander into the Myers house by herself, leaving her daughter, who was almost just killed, and watched her boyfriend murdered in front of her eyes, alone. and Michael's there. Somehow. I suppose he killed all 40 of the people around him and made it over to the house without anyone seeing or hearing him, like no one witnessed him get up and went to warn other people or anything. I guess they're insinuating that the group of people he killed were the only ones left in that area, and he got all of them, but no one, not one person in the remaining group of people heard this whole thing going on a block away. They show people screaming as he kills them, but I guess they were doing that old quiet screaming, so no one noticed. So I suppose you're saying, but that's all nitpicks and just general dumb stuff that's in every horror movie. Well, that's fine. But for me, it goes deeper than that. As a guy that likes horror because of good stories, there's none here. As I've already stated, there's no plot at all to this film. It's literally just Michael still alive and killing people. Townsfolk organize to stop him, find him within 5 minutes of actually looking, fight, end. It feels like a collection of deleted scenes. It's like they shot this whole other movie with a central character and driving storyline. And that movie's out there somewhere, but then they also shot all this ancillary stuff that doesn't really matter, and someone saw it and said, cut all that stuff out of it because it doesn't affect anything. But instead, they accidentally released that stuff instead of the main storyline. I don't know who the main character is because you'd think Laurie, but she's in it for about 5 minutes. Her granddaughter, who was a significant part of the first one, is sidetracked for 80% of this movie and really only does anything in the final 20 minutes. Same thing with Karen. For a bit, it seems like they want Tommy Doyle to be the main character, but he has no character arc and no development and doesn't even really do anything, and he's not even likable. They build up Hawkins by making him the focus of a 12-minute flashback scene, but then just have him lay in bed for the entire rest of the film. Everything about this one screams studio influence. It feels like they had a good idea for 2 movies, but were then asked to deliver a trilogy. But there really wasn't anywhere else to go with it, so they had to stall for time. Don't believe me? At the ending of the last movie, Laurie was injured and on her way to the hospital. Her family was shaken up, with her granddaughter traumatized by the attack. The town was in disarray, realizing that Michael had returned to kill again. By the ending of this film, literally all of that is still the same, except now Karen's dead. Almost all of the characters introduced in this film are now dead, so they won't impact the third film. So again, it's like they needed to make sure that everything is still in the same place they needed it to be to get to the final film. Plus, here's a drinking game. Take a shot every time that someone says he dies tonight or evil dies tonight. Make sure that you have enough liquor for 300 to 400 shots. Is this the worst Halloween film? No. It's well shot. It has that great score. And the killing stuff is pretty great and all. But considering how superfluous the whole thing is, it'll probably be one of my least favorite to watch. Love them or hate them, at least 5 or 6 had a contribution to the storyline as a whole, and Resurrection was at least unintentionally hilarious. This one takes itself so seriously most of the time, so I can't even really say that it's fun, like Busta Rhymes' Karate is fun. It's definitely a better movie than Rob Zombie's Halloween 2. Am I saying? Yeah. It's definitely a better movie than Rob Zombie's Halloween 2, but I don't know if I personally like it more than his first one. At least that one had a cohesive storyline. I'm not saying that any of those movies are good. I don't want to sound like I'm defending any of them, but I think I can say that I dislike them less than this one. All that being said, this is just my personal take, and if you don't agree with it, I'm fine with it. If you love this movie, I'm cool with that. If this is your favorite Halloween movie, it better not be. If this is your second favorite Halloween movie, then that's fine. Good on you. That's totally your opinion. I'm totally okay with that. This is just why I didn't like it. I want to know if you did love it. What did you love about it? Put it down below in the comments, and I want to see that. Yeah, that's about it. That's how I feel. Happy Halloween. It's almost Halloween and there's a new Halloween movie coming, so it seemed like a good time to visit the Myers house once again and also answer more Halloween unanswered questions. But this time, we're doing things differently since you guys have asked the questions. I asked you a while back to leave me some questions, and these are the 10 that got the most likes for me to answer on this edition of Unanswered Questions Ends. Question number 1. Jotto Rose wants to know, what happened to Michael's parents? In the original film, we're introduced to the Myers family in the opening sequence. The family consists of young Michael, his older sister Judith, who he pretty horribly murders, and then we briefly see their parents. They're Edith and Peter Myers, and after their daughter's death, they have young Michael committed to Smith's Grove, where he spends the next big chunk of his life. But what happened to his parents after that? Well, this answer, like a lot of what we're going to discuss today, depends on which timeline we're discussing. There are 4 distinct continuities in the Halloween franchise, which we'll refer to as the Thorn timeline, the H20, and yes, I said 20 because I'm pedantic like that, timeline, the Zombie timeline, and the H40 timeline. In terms of the zombie verse, it's pretty easy since his parents play a more prominent part of the story. It's said that his father passed away at some point when he was younger, and he was raised by his mother, Deborah. During the film, she's dating a man named Ronnie, who's a bit of an abusive ass, and Michael kills him as well as his older sister. Later on, his mother would go on to commit suicide and then just show up as a ghost here and there. In our original universe, it's also fairly concrete. During the course of the second film, Nurse Marion tells Loomis that 2 years after Michael was committed, they died. There was a novelization of the first film that stated that they just left town, but clearly that was not the direction the films went in, particularly because at that point there were no plans to have Michael and Laurie be related. Now, in the films, they simply say that the parents were killed and that they died 2 years after Michael was committed, but their method of their death is never given. There is, however, a comic book that depicts the incident, although it gets the date wrong. Michael killed Judith in 1963, and this gravestone says 1966, which is 3 years later instead of 2. The canon of this is questionable, so their method of death is up in the air, but considering Marion says they were killed first, it's clear that their deaths were not of natural cause. And they seemingly died at the same time, so a car crash does seem apt. Since we're talking original timeline, it's pretty fair to think that the Cult of Thorn was responsible for this, with getting the parents out of the way. Now that's 2 timelines covered, but since the H20 timeline keeps the second film in canon, we can just ascribe the same incidents here, minus the involvement of the cult if you like that theory. But that just leaves the H40 timeline, which eliminates the second film, leaving us with just the information from the first film. Now, so far, there has been no in-film mention of his parents, so it's a possibility to just go ahead and use that novelization backstory that they had simply moved away. This is backed up by the novelization of Halloween Kills, in which Frank Hawkins says that he doesn't know what happens to the Myers. After Judith was killed, he says they were simply gone, their house empty. The town theorized that they moved away, intent on starting a new family elsewhere. And this creates a theory that states that Michael's obsession with returning home, which in this timeline he does after escaping the asylum, after the incident with Laurie, and after escaping the burning house, is all part of him simply trying to find his parents. And so, hey, wait. So you're telling me that he returned to his childhood home several times in the past, and the Haddonfield police didn't have a ton of police around it when he escaped again? That sounds like bad writing. I mean, bad planning on their part. Question number 2. Sassy Fassy asked if Sam Loomis from Halloween is Sam Loomis from Psycho. So there's clearly a link to the classic Hitchcock film here. Not only does the film share the Loomis character name, but it also has Jamie Lee Curtis, daughter of Janet Leigh, who played a character named Marion. And there's also a character named Marion in Halloween. So this could just be another little nod, a little tip of the hat to the beloved film. But there's also a theory that it could be a little bit more than that, and that the characters are the same person. It states that Psycho Loomis, after helping to apprehend Norman Bates, became obsessed with psychology and helping people who had mental breaks like Bates had. He went back to school and studied, and eventually moved to the area around Haddonfield and started work at Smith's Grove. They say that the stress of dealing with everything that they went through caused him to gain weight and lose his hair, looking more haggard as he aged. Then he encounters a young Michael, a boy with a psychosis that Loomis recognized from his experience with Norman and attached himself to the case. However, there's tons of problems with this theory. I mean, first of all, Halloween Loomis is British.
Pardon me, I'm Loomis, Dr. Sam Loomis.
Psycho Loomis is not.
My boss is paying for this trip, and, well, it's 90% business.
He would have had to pick up a British accent as some sort of oddball affectation or something. Next is the time factor. Loomis started working with Michael as he was committed, and that was in 1963. Psycho took place in 1959. There's only a 4-year gap in between those two movies, which doesn't seem likely for him to have made that decision and had enough schooling to take on a job with a full-on sanitarium. But then there's the final straw in this theory's back, which makes no sense as a metaphor. What am I doing? Drinking its spinal fluid? But in Psycho 2, which takes place approximately 20 years after the original film, it's stated that Sam Loomis got married to Lila, Marion's sister from the film, and that he died a few years back. That means that he passed away sometime in the late 70s, which doesn't really make sense for fitting in with the Halloween series, especially given the fact that there's no mention of Loomis having a wife there. So no, the characters are not actually connected and merely share a common name. Question number 3. Here's an interesting one from Jed Schaefer, who wants to know why, if Michael has no connection to Laurie, does he spend so much time stalking her? This is a question that doesn't apply to the Thorn timeline, the H2O timeline, or the zombie timeline, since we know in those ones that Laurie and Michael are related, and he's trying to kill his sister. But when the H40 continuity wiped that detail out, it raises the question as to why Michael has so much interest in her anyway. And as much as I kind of like the concept of them being related, I think that this actually does make sense in the context of the original film, and sort of explains some of Michael's inconsistencies. So here's what happens. Laurie and Tommy walk up to Michael's house, and he catches sight of them and starts to follow. Now, based on the sister stuff, it would seem that's what piqued his interest, but Like, if she were his sister, how would he know outside of some sort of spider sense? And what actually happens here is that she reminds him of his other sister. Laurie's around the same age as Judith was and has a similar look, so that's what catches his attention. So now, here's what breaks it. He leaves the high school and peeping on Laurie to go to Tommy's school and stalk him. So, if his whole interest was following Laurie around because she's his sister, then why would he leave? Why the need to follow Tommy? And it's because the two of them coming to the house brought up those memories. He sees Judith in Laurie. He sees himself in Tommy. At that point, I don't think he's even following Laurie anymore. When he goes to that school to follow Tommy, he's more interested in him than he is Laurie. And I actually think that the next time we see him driving in the car past the three girls, that may not have been intentional. I think he was driving home from following Tommy and happened to see them. It was possible that he would have simply continued on if Annie didn't shout at him. I mean, he was just speeding by and didn't seem like he was interested until the old speed kills, and then slowed his roll and hid behind a hedge. He definitely sticks with Laurie again for a bit though, because of the similarity, but here's the thing. He stops following her and decides to stalk Annie. He has the choice for a bit to continue to go after Laurie. I mean, he knows exactly where she is, and the ending shows that he's not above just going in there even if the kids are around. But instead, he decides to follow Annie back to the Wallace house and then stay there for a bit. This shows that he's not wholly obsessed with following and killing Laurie. It's on his agenda, sure, because that reminder is there, but he can be easily swayed by getting at a girl who yelled at him, and then PJ Souls, because everyone is distracted by PJ Souls. Question number 4. Red Davison asks, if Halloween 2 didn't happen, then Ben Tramer survived. What's he up to? Oh, Ben. Poor Ben. All dude wanted to do was hook up with Laurie Strode on Halloween and ends up a Shatner flambe. Ben Tramer, otherwise known as the dude that Loomis got killed. A guy pops out of nowhere and he's not in police uniform and starts waving a gun at you, and you do not even have to be in a modern American school to know that it is time to start running. Of course he does, and gets hit by a police car that is apparently driving at a rather excessive level of speed in a suburban neighborhood full of trick-or-treating kids and goes up in a ball of flame. But hold up, if the H40 timeline says Halloween 2 didn't happen, then he didn't die as a result of Loomis being an idiot and the police being reckless. So then what happened to him? In this timeline, he's just a kid that Laurie had a crush on and isn't that smart and is never seen, just mentioned. He's brought back up in Halloween Kills as Laurie is talking to Hawkins and they discuss a possible relationship in the past. He states that it never happened because she was hung up on Ben Tramer. And this was after a story about him helping her out at a bar. So that means that Laurie was still hung up on Ben for quite a while after high school if she's still nursing that feeling post-drinking age. Now, in Halloween 2018, she states that she's been divorced twice, but it goes deeper than that. Hear me out. Laurie's daughter is Karen. According to her wiki, she's 38 years old, which makes sense. Judy Greer is older than the character, but the absolute oldest the character can be is 39, so 38 makes sense. This means that she was born 2 years after the first film, when Laurie was either 19 or 20. Oddly, director David Gordon Green revealed online that her father was a random man Laurie met at a bar and doesn't even remember his name. First of all, presuming that she was in that bar legally, that would make it a tight squeeze, and here's what I'm thinking. She met up with Hawkins one night at a bar, as she says in Kills, and she's a wreck, and it seems like they had romantic interest, but she was hung up on Tramer. She was hung up on him because they had a fling recently and was actually possibly pregnant with Karen at the time. It's very likely that Ben is Karen's actual dad and Green is just being cagey about the identity. This may be revealed as being BS as soon as Halloween comes out, because I feel like they may try to squeeze the character in there, especially with the death of Karen. But if not, Ben goes from going up in flames to going down on Laurie? And then having a baby. That got away from me. Question number 5.
Flex Riley has a Halloween 3 question, and he wants to know how Ellie got turned into an android so fast.
So, famously, Halloween 3 didn't feature Michael Myers, and instead the villains are the evil Silver Shamrock novelties, and the big reveal at the end is that their minions are robots. Near the ending of the movie, our heroes Dan and Ellie are taken captive with her taken first, and the doc manages to escape. Later, he finds Ellie strapped to a table and he rescues her as the pair escape. After destroying Stonehenge, because yes, Halloween 3 has the villain be Stonehenge, which is awesome, she attacks him and it's revealed that she's not Ellie after all and is a robot. But how did they turn her around that quickly? Some people think that she was a robot the entire time and a more sophisticated model that was programmed to interact with people, and you know what that means, Chalice boned a bot. But I don't think that makes sense. Look at how she talks and acts and compare that to after Dan finds her tied up. There's a distinct difference in her demeanor. If she were a model created to seem more human, why wouldn't she act that way when he found her? Well, first of all, I wanted to dispel that she was converted so quickly because it wasn't so quickly. They were captured in the middle of the night, and Dan doesn't escape until later on in the day of Halloween, giving them probably around 12 hours or so to complete their task. And the other point here is that she wasn't converted. It's not like they took her and made her into a robot. No, Ellie's just dead. When we see these guys taking her away right here, that's the last we see of her. They're taking her to some back room to off her. This is just a robot, like all the others. But doesn't a 12-hour window seem a little short to create a complete robot duplicate of someone? Sure, but they don't have to make a complete duplicate. First off, they don't have to imitate or program her personality because she just acts like a blank slate, and I'm sure that they have stock body forms around, like some random male ones and female ones. Literally, all they would have to do is sculpt the head and make an imitation of her face, and considering that they're at a factory that makes robots, I think that 12 hours is plenty of time for that. But there's other questions. You assume that they made the bot to confuse and trick Dan, right? But it's not like they were planning for him to escape. They thought that they had him and were gonna kill him. And there was no way that they could expect that he would randomly stumble on that room and find her there after he escaped. So why did they even duplicate her in the first place? And then, if she were made to stop Dan, why didn't she? The bot just chilled while he brought down the entire operation and didn't actually show its true colors until much later on in the car.
Well, I don't know, Flex Riley. Geez, I already answered your one question. What do you want from me? Maybe in the next volume of Halloween Questions.
Question number 6.
This next question is from your friendly neighborhood Uncle Pete, and he wants to know if there's any possibility that the Myers-Shatner mask could be from Silver Shamrock.
Now, I've seen this theory floating around, and it's that the mask of Michael is a part of the whole Silver Shamrock plan. But there's more to it than that, of course. First of all, we need to establish that Halloween 3 takes place in the same universe as the others, which I kind of already did in my first Halloween UQ video, so go check that out so I don't have to repeat myself here. But since then, the 3 masks have appeared in Halloween Kills, establishing even further that they not only exist in continuity, but they're rooted in the world of the first film. But to say that the shape mask is cursed eliminates one minor detail, and that's the fact that Michael was way evil before ever putting that thing on. His darkness began all those years ago on Halloween night, so I think that there's very little chance of that. But what about that clown mask? What if, bear with me here because I've already linked the Cult of Thorn to Conal Cochran's group, they're connected via Mrs. Blankenship, and it's shown that the cult was involved with the Curse of Thorn and Michael in the first place. What if his mask, that original clown mask, was tampered with by the cult? I theorized that in that timeline, the one where the Cult of Thorn exists and has a connection to Silver Shamrock, that mask was their method of transferring that curse into him. Everyone said that he was a normal little boy up until that night, but make a special delivery of a very special mask with a very special purpose, and that's to transfer dark energy into him and create their emissary. Question number 7.
Okay, Hunter X05 wants to know exactly how Loomis survived that explosion.
The ending of Halloween 2 is pretty final. In a big showdown between Loomis, Michael, and Laurie, the good doc gets stabbed and Michael gets his eyes shot out. Sam then sets off an explosion that destroys an entire section of the hospital and seems pretty unsurvivable. We see Michael emerge from the blast pretty much covered in flames and it seems to consume him, but he's always been pretty resilient, so it should be no surprise to find out that he lived. But in Halloween 4, we see that he's not the only one. Loomis is fine and seems to have only suffered some mild scarring on the side of his face and a limp. So how in the hell did that happen? How did a regular dude survive this? Well, although it's not in the film, there actually was an explanation in the film's script. There, it was revealed that the initial force of the blast sent him flying, and he was knocked into the adjacent hallway. He was then shielded from the ensuing fireball, suffering only minor burns. The impact would explain the limp, I guess, and let's face it, it's a pretty slim explanation, but it works. In the end, Dwight Little, Part 4's director, stated that he thought it would be best to not show it and simply leave it up to the imagination of the viewer. And by viewer, he meant me. He was like, look, in about 30 years or so, there's going to be this dude who's going to drive himself nuts trying to come up with rationales for this stuff, so just leave it be. Let him do the work for us.
Thanks, Dwight.
So yeah, you can go with the whole thrown across the room thing if you want. I mean, that works, it's fine. But I have more to add to this because think about it. If the blast was enough to send Loomis flying, then why didn't it do the same to Michael? And we've now seen Sam survive a scalpel, an explosion, another slashing in Part 5, and being thrown against a banister, a goddamn stroke, and getting clocked in the head by a goon, because in real life, head injuries like this aren't just harmless. I know in film that human skulls are like whack-a-moles, but not so much in reality. And let's face it, Loomis survives a number of things that should do in a normal human being, and he's not really a young man or an in-shape one. He ends up less damaged from the hospital explosion than freaking Michael Myers does. So look, there's clearly other forces at work here. And I say, if we're saying in this timeline the Cult of Thorn is in full effect and the curse is what's driving Michael and his resilience, who's to say that there's not an equal and opposite force opposing it? Perhaps, unknowingly, Loomis is the avatar of this force driving his obsession with stopping Michael. Sure, it's personal, but it's also because he's a pawn for an outside entity, which could account for some of his erratic behaviors and shifting personalities. When Michael is more active, the good curse is as well, making him more irritable and erratic.
Or, you know,
they got thrown into a hallway. Question number 8.
Rob Dorn wants to know why on earth Haddonfield would even want to still celebrate Halloween.
And yeah, you'd think that after all that stuff going on that they'd just give up, but it's a little cleaner than that. First off, you have 3 movies worth that technically only encompass one bad Halloween for Haddonfield. Parts 1 and 2 are on the same night, and 3 takes place in another state. But then there's a 10-year gap between that one night and Michael's return, so it's pretty clear why they still celebrate in Part 4. I'll get back to part 5 in a minute, but part 6 takes place after a 6-year gap between films, and they actually did cancel Halloween, and that movie has them tentatively beginning to celebrate it again. So that leaves part 5 as the only one in the early set in which it would be a thing. And apparently, having 2 bad holidays in a row was enough for the town. So I think the Thorn timeline is covered, and it makes sense why they would still have the holiday in between. Now, the H20 timeline makes that even more concrete because it wipes out 3 through 6. And then, that one doesn't even take place in Haddonfield. Resurrection does, but keep in mind in this continuity, it's been about 23 years since that one bad night the town had, so there's definitely reason for them to still have the holiday. The Zombieverse I don't think I need to explain because it reboots it all, and the H40 timeline is the same. They have the holiday because it's been 40 years since the Myers incident, and it was a one-time thing. Besides, you're gonna tell people that they can't celebrate Hallow-freaking-ween, the best holiday of the year? The next thing you're gonna say is that they can't have unprotected sex with co-eds when you go camping. Question number 9.
The next question comes from the 4 mood groups, and he wants to know if Michael Myers is supernatural.
Again, we have to discuss this question in multiple parts since it's a different approach in each continuity, since they all approach the backstory to the character in a different way. If we're discussing the Thorn timeline, then it's absolutely certain that Michael is supernatural. Even if you were to eliminate the Thorn cult element and presuppose that they're mistaken about his even coming from the Thorn rune, the guy survives an unnatural amount of damage throughout the series, including bullets in the eyes. On top of that, he has a sort of mystical connection to his family members and is able to sense his niece, and the two share some sort of psychic bond, which definitely follows under the supernatural category. The Rob Zombie timeline, I think, rules out any supernatural elements. It does dance around them a bit in the second film with the possibility of some sort of psychic link between Michael and Laurie, but I actually believe that to be more an element of hereditary psychosis than anything mystical. In these 2 films, Michael himself doesn't appear to exhibit any supernatural abilities outside of just being more resilient to damage, but his drastically increased size and strength can account for that. So, then there's the confusing 2. The H20 timeline doesn't really have a Michael that seems supernatural. I mean, sure, seems hard to kill, but he doesn't appear to take any sort of damage that you would roll your eyes at and say, come on, no one could live through that. But here is one thing that gives me some suspicions, and it's a single shot of Michael's perfect and intact eyeball. Dude was blinded at the ending of the second film with 2 bullet wounds to his peepers. I know that there's some theories about how they didn't go in his eyes but grazed them and he's blinded by blood running in them, but I don't really see any evidence of that in the film. I feel like that would show some sort of damage to the mask, and their trajectory doesn't make any sense that way. So to me, those eyes are toast, and a Thorn timeline curse would certainly explain them being healed, but that's not in this version. So how is this orb all purdy? The only answer is by supernatural means. This Michael must have some sort of unnatural regenerative abilities in order to be able to see again. Hell, from what we can see of his skin, he doesn't even seem to be burned from the big fire. So even that has been healed. So yeah, that guy's supernatural too. Although there is one other explanation I can think of there, but I'm gonna save that for that other volume of questions I was talking about earlier. So that only leaves the H40 timeline. So far, there really hasn't been enough information to give us proof one way or the other. Although Halloween Kills does seem to show Michael take an inhuman amount of damage and still be able to get up. While at the same time, Laurie talks about how the more that Michael kills, the more he transcends into something else and something impossible to defeat, hinting pretty greatly that he's backed by some other supernatural means. I guess we'll find out whether that is the truth in the upcoming sequel. Question number 10. And this last one's for me, and it's one that there's been some discussion on recently, and that's whether or not Michael is still a virgin.
Recently, someone asked this question of John Carpenter himself, and JC said that he believed that the killer still had that V card in his wallet. He said that he thought that he never was able to because he confused sex with killing, which can be backed up by the intro of the original film. After watching his older sister do the deed, his first instinct was to draw a large kitchen knife and plunge it into her. Again, we have to break this down through what we see in each timeline. Now, in the Thorn timeline, we sort of had an answer. We know that he went to the hospital very young and basically stared at a wall until he escaped. So, in the context of the first and second movies, he's still chaste. He's then in a coma for 10 years, so no nookie there. And then asleep in a vagrant's bed for a year, so still no action. But then there's part 6, specifically the producer's cut, in which it is heavily implied that Jamie's baby is the product of an incestuous action from Michael. However, in order to go with this, first of all, you have to take the producer's cut as the canon cut, which is debatable. And secondly, you have to presume that they didn't use some sort of artificial means of impregnating her. A case can be made for Michael to have slapped Ham, but it's not guaranteed. Rob Zombie Michael absolutely did not have sex. He had the same staring at the wall thing going on in the first film, and in the interim between films, no one's sleeping with that dirty dude. And then H40 Michael is definitely a no-go on the bone throw because he's just a big nothing while in the hospital, locked down and zoned out. There's no chance for that guy to have danced the forbidden dance. But what about H20 Michael? I mean, if anyone got laid, it's that guy. He was out in the world for 20 years, unattended, and with no comas going on and imprisonment. Sure, he was still pretty single-mindedly obsessed with killing his family, but what? He was just sitting around in someone's place for 2 decades? I'm sure this version did something in that interim, and one of those things may possibly have been bumping uglies.
So there you have it, 10 more questions about Halloween that you guys asked. Hopefully you like the answers that I came up with you. Thank you guys for supplying these questions. I thought this was a lot of fun to kind of answer your questions instead of ones that I had myself. It was a different way to approach this. I'm going to do that again in the future with some other things, but I hope you enjoyed these questions. If not, let me know down below in the comments. If you have other questions about the Halloween movies, let me know those down below as well. As always, if you like this video, give it a like. If you enjoy what you see on the channel, hit the subscribe button, and of course check out my patrons. They help keep this channel going and they help support me, and I'd appreciate it if you did the same thing by going to patreon.com/movietimelines. It'd be pretty awesome of you to do so. And you know what? We'll see you on the next episode of Unanswered Questions.
Hey guys, it's Halloween, and I figured what better place to bring you this video than from the H45 convention here in Pasadena, celebrating 45 years of the classic John Carpenter movie. But today, we're not talking about movies, nope. We're talking about comic books. We're going to check out the entire history of Michael Myers in print. It's kind of hard to believe that it took all the way into the year 2000 for Michael Myers to get a 4-color showcase, but it finally happened with Chaos Comics' Halloween #1. So this was 2000. So this was post H2O and pre-Resurrection. So as far as the film world knew, Michael had his head chopped off, but they had already announced Resurrection by this point. So people knew that he'd be back. It begins in Haddonfield with Tommy Doyle looking vaguely like the Rudd version, looking to pick up the Loomis files in order to write a book. And it mentions that the doc first met Michael back in '63. Right after killing his sister. Grown-up Michael is there, and we get a flashback to the intro of the original film, and then into November of '63, and young Mikey is at the hospital, already showing violent tendencies. He kills several inmates, but they all look like accidents or suicides, and
even takes out another doctor. And when Myers arrives at the Doyle's house in the present, he says that he already killed him. So it appears as if this is in the continuity of the original series and taking place after the 6th film. He fights with Tommy, knocking him out of the window on fire, but then Michael disappears. This was followed up a few months later, in April of 2001, again from Chaos, with Halloween 2, The Blackest Eyes. I should point out that this one and the last one were both written by the late Philip Nutman, and this picks up right where the last one left off, and Tommy goes on the hunt. We see the Myers house, and Richie Castle says that it's been 24 years since he met the boogeyman there, and it's shown that he's the kid that bumped into Michael outside the school in the first film, which places this in 2002 then. He goes to burn the place down, but is killed. But then it gets weird because we see Sheriff Brackett, and he says it's been 22 years since Michael killed Annie and her friends, although that was at the same time that Richie met Michael, so one of those dates is a misprint. So this is either 2002, or if the 22 years is correct, then it's 2000. It's the same time frame because Brackett sees Richie's now dead body there, but 2000 may make more sense since it'd be post H2O and pre-resurrection if this is merging both continuities. It's said that Brackett moved to Pennsylvania, although Part 4 said he retired to Florida, and there's some backstory about Haddonfield saying that it was cursed, and there's a druid leader named Murphy Myers who moved there, running from the witch trials. It's said that the Myers family had a curse almost 2,000 years old, and then they mention Mrs. Blankenship and the cult. So, we're firmly in the original timeline. They discuss Michael's birth in 1957, saying that he was stillborn, but then was just alive again, likely soulless due to the curse. They say that Brackett dated Judith Myers before he went away to college, which is weird because the events of the film are 15 years after her death, and he has Annie, and she's in high school and meant to be 17, which means that she'd have been 2 years old when Judith died, so that seems unlikely. Mrs. Blankenship shows up to say, "Right you are," and they capture Brackett and Doyle, but they escape and fight Myers, electrocuting him and blowing him up. But the druids set Tommy up for Brackett's death, sending him to prison. The tale carried on later that year, since in November of 2001, Chaos released Halloween 3, The Devil's Eyes, and in the intro blurb it tells us that the previous 2 issues were 2 years ago. So we'd be in 2002 now, unless they're going with the 2002 date, so this would be 2004? But I think that the previous makes more sense. But then it tells us that it's right before Halloween of 2001, and that 2 years ago, Tommy had his earlier encounter. So the first 2 issues were 1999? And those comments about it being either 24 or 22 years don't make sense, because either one of them, since if that were 99, it would have been 21 years later. Tommy's at Smith's Grove now, and Wynn is still in charge, so he wasn't killed at the ending of Part 6, and Doyle escapes. Lindsay Wallace then reappears, and she says it's 23 years since she met the boogeyman, and that's finally a correct number, and she's now a reporter. But here's where it gets interesting. She says that last year there was a news report that Michael was killed, decapitated by his sister, Laurie Strode. This merges the 2 universes and places H2O in continuity with the original series in this telling. But yeah, that time frame is still wrong, since that would put H2O in 2000, and the movie is called H2O, and the 2O stands for 20, 20 years later, so 1998, not 2000. It's then said that they found a decapitated man at the crime scene, presumed to be Michael's, and that Laurie is now missing. Lindsay reiterates that it was a year ago, and they say that Tommy is now 32. He was 8 in the original film, so that would make this 24 years later, which would be 2002. So yeah, they needed an editor on this one. There's a flashback to 1970 as Loomis discovers that there's a third Myers child, and it's pointed out that Loomis didn't discover that Laurie was Michael's sister until 78, 8 years after his revelation here. But Mikey arrives and stabs Tommy. Lindsay goes back to the Myers house and fights him, but Tommy's still alive, and together they unmask him, but it's Laurie? She pushes Doyle out the window and I guess kills him, and then it's 4 weeks later and we find out that Laurie was driven mad and in a way became Michael, or else the curse took her over instead. But that was it for Chaos Comics, so that's where their continuity ended. And I guess you could make that its own universe, or like a continuation from the 6th film, if you like. The next Halloween comic was in 2003, and it was an exclusive comic that was created for the H25 convention. You see, in Pasadena every year there's a Halloween convention. At the 25th one, they released Halloween One Good Scare, which tells us on the very first page that it's Halloween of 2003, and we're introduced to a never-before-seen son of Doc Loomis. And then it bounces back 1 year to 2002, and Loomis Jr. is working at Smith Grove, and they have a new patient that claims that Michael Myers is after her, and it's Lindsay. They say that she's 32 years old and she's on the run from Michael, and with the discussion of the Loomis file and Wallace on the run from Michael, it's possible that this is picking up from the Chaos run. But then she says that she saw Michael last year, so we're now in a flashback within a flashback, and I guess in 2001, the same year as the last issue of the Chaos books. But she says that they found Laurie's body and she encounters Michael, and it seems like the first time since 78. So it looks like this is in continuity with H2O and Resurrection, and not the earlier Chaos books. A year passes, so we catch up to the intro, and Myers appears and attacks, and confusingly, the artist has him kill a security guard, but makes him look a whole lot like young Loomis, so it's a bit distracting as to who is getting killed until you see the security badge detail. A nurse talks about moving to Santa Mira, a Halloween 3 reference, and Lindsay slips on blood, like she's the last starfighter or something, and Loomis is too cowardly to help her. Michael then slices Lindsay's tendons so she can't run away and carries her off to kill her. The story picked up again 3 years later with another independent comic from Stefan Hutchinson, who wrote One Good Scare also, and this one was called Halloween Autopsis, and starts with a young man who finds his projectionist father dead in the booth. This, for some reason, inspires him to become a photographer, and he's having some trouble finding work. And a man tells him that Michael Myers is still alive, and he says that the official word is that he burnt to death along with a hospital. He then shows Carter a picture of Annie Brackett dead and says he wants photo proof that Michael is still alive. So it's clear that we're now set in the past since he's meant to follow Loomis, so it's likely this is in the time between parts 2 and 4, or parts 2 and H2O, depending upon which continuity this wants to be in. Sheriff Brackett makes an appearance, and he says that it's been 15 years since his daughter's death, so that would place this around 1993. So this is in the era between 5 and 6 when Michael has been freed from custody by the Man in Black, but before Loomis got his plastic surgery. But judging from the last issue, it's likely that this is based in some other continuity and not the original, or even its own, but it's likely the H2O continuity, so it's likely that 4 and 5 didn't happen here. While Carter is following Loomis, it turns out that Myers is following him and just kills him. So I do think that this is in the H2O continuity, and that this is likely in the era in between part 2, when he went missing, and the beginning of H2O. That story was continued, but in an unusual way, with a Hutchinson-written PDF prose comic published directly online called Halloween Sam in 2008. It begins in 1957, the year of Michael's birth, and tells of Loomis leaving London to move to the US. It then jumps ahead and basically goes through the Halloween saga, detailing the events of the first film through the Doc's eyes, then moving on to the second film. His supposed death at the end of that one is just as brushed over here as it was in the films, and he just survived, but this is set in the H2O continuity, and then details how he worked with Laurie and created her identity of Carrie Tate, and discusses how he was trying to track Myers down between Part 2 and H2O, filling in some of the gaps between the two. He then has the heart attack discussed in the later film, brought on by his obsession with the evil, and then has a lost love of his from England come over and encounters Marion Crane meeting with Brackett, but Michael soon captures her. But then we realize that Sam is still alive, having survived the heart attack, but Myers appears and brings him Elizabeth's severed hand, revealing that he also brought her along, tied to a chair. Sam convinces Michael to leave, but Loomis discovers that he has carved Carrie Tate into her back, revealing that he knows his sister's new identity. And then he dies, his heart giving out. We're then told that he was pronounced dead in 1995, but the room was all cleaned up, and there's no sign of Elizabeth. It then jumps to 98 and sets up the beginning of H2O. Also in 2008, Halloween would get its first ever series of a sort, with the 4-issue limited series Halloween Night Dance from Devil's Due. Hutchinson stayed on as writer, and Tim Seeley came on board to do the art, and the first page sets us before Halloween in the year 2000. We meet a girl named Lisa, who is a dancer, and then a couple in Chicago. Then, a young girl being held captive with a drawer full of Shatners. A little boy that Lisa used to babysit is sending her horrible drawings, and I mean horrible like they're violent, but I'm also judging his art skills. And Michael shows up to kill Marcy here and then vanish. Her husband Ryan makes it back to town and tells the police it was Myers, and they say that he's been dead for years, but there's no real insight given as to when this takes place in continuity. But based on the date, this is presumably in the space between H2O and Resurrection. Meanwhile, we find out that 2 years ago, in 1998 I presume, Lisa was babysitting Daniel and was locked into a cellar by an unseen man and was stuck there for 2 days, but now Michael is after her because she bears a resemblance to his sister Judith. He leaves without taking her, but she follows him, running into Ryan along the way. It turns out that Marcy was Daniel's aunt, and they were going to his house, but Michael had already been there and killed them all. And they find where he's been hiding, and Marcy's body, her head turned into a jack-o'-lantern. Myers attacks, and they fight, with the killer cutting out Ryan's tongue and putting a mask on him, causing the police to shoot him dead. Mikey then captures Lisa and buries her alive in a makeshift grave for his sister, completely naked, so yeah.
Yeah, not exactly the cheeriest of endings.
Also in 2008, there was Halloween 30 Years of Terror, obviously celebrating 30 years since the OG film. It starts back in 1978 on that night, and shows us Tommy and Lindsay after they flee the house, going to the Mackenzies, and it then flashes ahead many years, with Mary Mackenzie remembering that night, and she's haunted by Michael. And I guess it's kind of ambivalent if he kills her, or is just terrorizing her. And then it's a second story, and there's a beauty pageant that's apparently in 1991. And it's one of the stories that was told way back in the very first issue that Hutchinson did about the beauty queen who was found beheaded. And that's it. That's the whole story. No reason for being in there. The next one is a tale of Laurie during the time that she was in the sanitarium in between H2O and Resurrection. And it's a little abstract, and it doesn't necessarily give us much new information, and it's just her remembering her youth. The next segment is in 2005, and I guess we have Tommy Doyle here. It's his first appearance in this continuity, and he's married with a son, and then part of the story is a comic within a comic about a guy named Tarantula Man, and Tommy still draws Michael.
Yep. That's that one.
The next takes place in 1989 at the Haddonfield Elementary School, but then Loomis is here again, as is Marion, and they're trying to track Michael.
and he tips them off and kills a teacher right under their noses. That's kind of it. Like, pretty much all of these stories are just kind of there. In late 2008, Devil's Due followed that up with a limited series called Halloween, the first death of Laurie Strode, again written by Hutchinson, who had sort of become the official Halloween comic writer, I suppose. It gives us Laurie's point of view, showing us the ending of Halloween 2, and she attends Annie's funeral a few days later. And this isn't the original continuity, since we know that they never found Michael's body, and we see him get a new mask, so not dead after all. But we knew that. And we also see that Jimmy survived, much like in the TV cut of the movie. It's then shown that Laurie and Michael's parents died in a car crash in 1966, a few years after Judith's death, and that's when she was adopted by the Strodes. Laurie has another school friend named Sally that she hangs out with and still sees Mikey stalking her, and Loomis shows back up, and there's flashbacks to a young Michael being creepy, and then it jumps ahead to May of '79, as Laurie graduates from high school, and they say that the way that they covered up her death when she was a child was by saying that she was killed in the car crash with her parents. And then, in a pretty funny moment, he mentions seeing Ben Tramer dying and blames it on some cosmic series of events, like it wasn't you chasing him into the street in front of a speeding cop car, Loomis. Laurie is chased by Michael in a clown costume, and he kills Jimmy, ending on a cliffhanger. But that's where it ended, since the third issue of this 3-issue limited series was never released. It seems some behind-the-scenes issues at Devil's Due caused them to be unable to complete the series, but it's said that number 3 detailed the final actions that she took before faking her death in a car crash to lead into the events of H2O. They had also planned to do another series that never got made called Halloween, the Mark of Thorn, which would have revolved around this version of Tommy Doyle in his comic book, which would be about the Cult of Thorn, sort of tying in the original continuity. But again, this was never released. So there you have it, several series worth of Halloween comic books, and I think actually what's weird is the continuity of the Halloween comics is more put together than the Halloween movies. Definitely less disjointed, but yeah, I don't know if you enjoyed those. Definitely let me know. I want to hear down below in those comments if you've ever heard of these or if you enjoyed this little trip into the 4-color world. Let me know down below what you thought of that. Hit that like button, hit the subscribe if you enjoyed the channel as well. And please check out my Patreon page at patreon.com/movietimelines and check that out. I'll see you very shortly for another great video. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.